Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached it. We have reached the end of a long road. This is ATACS Game of the Year podcast, day 3. The last day where we will be talking about our Game of the Year, which we're going to do a little bit differently from some other places and actually give you an ordered list of our top 10 games for the calendar year 2016. I'm your host, Paul, from Atlanta, and joining me at our virtual roundtable is Mr. Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. What's up, Flex?
There's only one game that matters.
And that game is Doom. And also joining
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Also joining us from Wendell, North Carolina, Mr. Nate. How's it going, Nate?
Pretty good. There are more than 10 games that matter.
That's actually the truth.
True. And last but not least, Mr. Ryan from New York, New York. How's it going, Ryan?
We meet again.
We meet again. Almost as though we've done this 3 days in a row now. So, before we get into the Game of the Year stuff, whenever we go through and we make these lists and we go through these categories, some stuff fits in very organically, some stuff doesn't, and there's always a few games that just seem to get left out for really any reason. So we wanted to just sort of dedicate a certain bit of time this afternoon to go through some of these games that we really liked, that we wanted to talk about, but maybe didn't quite fit into the other categories. We're not nominating a winner or anything. We're just doing some shout outs for some stuff that we haven't talked about before moving into the Game of the Year discussion. And the first thing that we have on the list is the Banner Saga 2, which everyone except for me played. So we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't really hit on every little piece of that, did we?
Yeah, we talked about it in, I think, both best sound and best look, and a lot of the reason I wanted to do these shout-outs is because we often go through those kind of categories and end up not actually talking about how games play, so a lot of stuff to discuss kind of falls through the cracks. And when it comes to Banner Saga 2, I actually really like the game's combat. I'm not going to sit here and say it's like the best tactical combat ever made, but I think it has its own interesting spin to it, and I enjoy engaging with that stuff, and I think it fits in with like everything else the game does with the tone of its world and its characters and all of that stuff. So I think it's another part of the Banner Saga package that I like a lot, and I like playing that game because I think it does a number of things pretty well.
And just to jump in on that, I mean, the Banner Saga got a few, or the Banner Saga 2 rather, got a few knocks for being a bit of a sequel, but I think it's worth mentioning that the Banner Saga 1 was a pretty great game, and the Banner Saga 2 is still a pretty great game. So I mean, the fact that it's a little more the same, may diminish that a little bit, but it's still really good overall. I do think though that the combat in that game actually suffered the most in the sequel, just because of all the story possibilities that can change your party structure. I felt like they had to kind of make things a lot easier, make sure that nobody kind of floundered.
Right.
That was my perspective on it.
Yeah, for my part, I ended up enjoying the combat about the same as the first part. But
the first game wasn't super hard either, but it felt like in the second game they had to make it even easier because, story decisions can easily just take characters away that you've invested in.
Right.
And that kind of was amplified moving from the first to the second game. Yeah,
I could see that. But yeah, overall, it's a continuation of a game that was already really strong. And in some ways, I like the Banner Saga more than most sequels. Needs to be a sequel because it's just a direct continuation. So if they made a lot of big changes, it would probably be a little jarring.
Yeah. Specifically about the combat, I'll just say, and then we can move on. The thing that I really like in that game is the health and armor system that they use. It's just a really neat way of doing a different style of RPG combat where if you take damage, your character has less strength to deal damage back. So it ends up with a lot of weird things that you don't get in other games because of that system.
Yeah, it does promote a different kind of thinking, which, like I said, it may not necessarily be better than other styles, but by being different, I think it stands out.
Yeah.
And then you add Bulwark to the mix.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Everything up.
Bulwark's amazing. This goes berserk.
Yeah, and I'm I'm kind of glad that we're going through and talking about some of the stuff because that's a pretty neat mechanic that I didn't know, that your characters deal less damage back once they get hurt,
Yeah.
which makes complete sense in the real world. But I guess after playing so much D&D, 1 hit point means I'm just fine.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because in that game, literally your health and your strength are the same stat. So if you have 8 health, that's 8 hit points, but you also deal 8 damage when you swing. So it's a really simple and intuitive but effective way to go with that idea.
Yeah.
All right. The next thing that I wanted to give a quick shout out to was Final Fantasy 15. There's that game's been in development for a long time. It's been very, very well documented exactly what's been going on with that. But after, at least to me, a very disappointing set of games with Final Fantasy 13, all 3 of those games, none of those really resonated with me. I was very glad to return to a world and a time where Final Fantasy was relevant again. I think that over the years that series has done a lot to move that genre as a whole forward, and I pretty much always kind of mark calendars like, all right, Final Fantasy's coming out, and I gotta clear some space off. So I was pretty sad when the Final Fantasy 13 games didn't really do it for me, and to a lesser extent, Final Fantasy 12 didn't do it for me either. But I'm glad that 15 is good. And I'm glad that Square Enix was able to sort of get back on the rails, as it were, because I think that gaming is made better when that company is putting out things that are successful as a whole. But so yeah, I'm just really glad that sort of came together and came out in a way that, while it may not be everyone's game of the year, it was pretty well received. And I haven't completed it, but from what I've seen so far, it's definitely a step up from the previous entries in that series.
Yeah, I do want to echo a few of those things. I mean, I'm still in the middle of my playthrough, so the final verdict's still out for me. But at the same time, just from the 25, 30 hours I've played, I do feel like they've made a game that's worth playing. And that's, it took them a long time, and it's definitely still a rough around the edges. But at the same time, like, it is nice to see Square actually doing something relevant. And there's a story and a setting there that feels like it's worth telling, which 13 I feel like really struggled with getting off the ground on. And it seems like Square kind of lost its way, like Paul was saying, with it was putting out these big, visually appealing games with these really complex, intricate systems, but then like the characters weren't that interesting, or the story took forever to ramp up. And it's not to say that 15 is perfect by any means, but they create something that at times feels organic, and it feels like it's a story worth telling.
Yeah, and it's not quite video games, but I also wanted just to give a quick shout to Square Enix. The stuff that they released around Final Fantasy 15, the anime episode, sorry, the anime episodes and Kingsglaive, that's fiction that stands out decently well on its own. So if you're a fan of those genres, then it's certainly watching, even if you don't intend to play the game.
Yeah, Kingsglaive was pretty fun. Kind of reminded me of Advent Children in a way.
Yeah, it was it was very shiny, and I actually liked it a lot. And Sean Bean continues to carry on his role of just never quite making it, which is hilarious to me. But yeah, so
we should have had a category this year for best use of Sean Bean.
We should have, and that would have probably been Kingsglaive.
No, it wouldn't have.
Civilization 6.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, did he die at the end of Civ 6?
No, and that's why it's the best use.
Oh, that's funny. So the next game on our list is Gears of War 4. Flex, Nate, you guys played this.
Yeah, and we talked some about it in multiplayer, which I think that game's multiplayer is still good in the way Gears multiplayer has always been good. I would still like to see more of that horde mode, but I don't know if or when that'll happen. But I also enjoyed the campaign, like whether you're playing it co-op or single player. Like, I think it's a solid campaign. I think you also liked it fairly well, Nate?
Yeah, those games still play super well. Gears of War is just like super smooth action gameplay, moving around cover, aim, shoot, active reload. That still just feels good. I think they added a lot of new good enemy types. I like the robot faction that they added for this new entry. Most of the new characters are inoffensive at worst and charming at best, I would say.
Yeah, I like Kate.
Yeah, Kate's cool. Old Man Marcus is a pretty good.
That's the thing I was going to say is I really like Old Man Marcus's like reintroduction to Gears.
Yeah.
Like you bust into the room and he's like basically just waiting there, sitting in a chair, staring at the door, shotgun at his side, and he's just like, "What do you want?"
Yeah.
And like he's running this ranch and he's got like, he's growing crops and stuff. So then like when robots are chasing you through and they're destroying stuff, like he's more concerned that they're destroying his tomatoes than anything else.
Yep.
And like just hearing Old Man Marcus get pissed about his tomatoes is hilarious.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in that game. It's not perfect all the way through, but I think the campaign is still highly enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard a lot about Gears 4 that is positive in a way that was surprising to me because I thought that series wrapped up really well with Gears 3. But it's kind of cool that Gears 4 came out and it wasn't horrible and it wasn't a blatant cash grab.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately more Gears, but yeah, it's still fun.
Yeah. So next game that we wanted to shout out was Grow Up, which we did talk about earlier, but that was in the most disappointing category, and the game's not all bad.
Yeah, let's say something good
isn't?
about Grow Up.
Wait,
Yeah,
what?
So say some nice things about Grow Up, please.
Grow Up is still super charming in the same ways that Grow Home was, but is still a great character.
Does he still drunkenly walk off ledges when you don't want him to?
Yeah, he does.
That game sucks.
Game is still fun.
I kid.
I just really like the way those games look. I really like the climbing mechanics that they introduced in Grow Home. They're still here in Grow Up. The stuff we talked about in Disappointment all still stands, but even though it is somewhat disappointing in some ways, I still had a lot of fun playing this game.
Yeah. So I'm like I said, I'm glad to hear some positive things from that because, like I kind of felt bad about the games that were only in the most disappointing category, but then never anywhere else. So this is
Yeah, Grow Up's still a good game.
Yeah.
Some of those games deserve to be only in that category.
You're certainly right about that. So now we're going to enter into what I'm going to call the Ryan block. We got 3 games back to back because we believe in alphabetical order in this world. So help me out, Ryan. How do you pronounce the Homeworld Deserts of what? How do you pronounce that?
Carrick is the way that I think it's pronounced. I don't know if I got that from the game or that's just the way I've always said it. Yes, sit back and prepare for the Ryan block. No, starting with Homeworld, this is a game that didn't quite make my top 10, and it didn't really show up in any of our previous categories, but it is a pretty cool game, and it's actually sort of like an honorable mention for me, maybe somewhere just below the top 10. It's a game that does a lot of things pretty well, not necessarily standing out in any of them. It's a real-time, first of all, I guess it's a real-time strategy game, a classic RTS in a lot of ways, which is kind of neat and refreshing because, that's a genre that I feel like doesn't see a ton of action these days. Has a pretty cool setting. I'm not familiar with, the other Homeworld games, so, I don't, maybe our listeners or someone else on the panel is familiar with that, but this is this kind of science fiction setting where you're in the aftermath of advanced civilization. So, your people piece together this technology and they're living on this desert planet and kind of fighting amongst themselves, trying to discover some of the technology of their past. That creates an interesting story. And, there's some culture there and cultural differences. And the game, as an RTS, it has an RTS campaign that's pretty fun. You kind of build up during the campaign, which is something that a lot of single player RTS campaigns do. Looks really nice. I have some screenshots on one of my personal albums. It's got a nice look, nice sound. So overall, good story, good sound. decently fun RTS execution. Like, probably not quite enough to stand out or make a mention in any of the other categories, but overall just a solid package.
Yeah, I played a little of the original Homeworld. I remember one of the big points of that one being like the full 3D movement in space, and I would guess this doesn't have that because you're on the ground this time, but like I could still see that translating pretty well.
Yeah. It's more of a classic RTS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so moving on into another game, I guess I would classify as a real-time strategy game, Off-World Trading Company. This was a bit of a surprise for me. Like, I did some research before I picked it up, and I thought it was something I would like, but it's an approach to the strategy game genre, I guess, that's different than I would expect. Starting off, the game has like a pretty neat like character to it. Like, you start off and like the intro opening cutscene is like Earth may be dying, so humanity's having to take to the stars. But then the rest of the game is about how you're basically like a corporate sleazebag, trying to turn the biggest profit.
So it's a game about capitalism
and save the human race using capitalism.
Nice.
Great.
But the things that are pretty cool about that game, and I mean, it tells that story effectively because, like, as you make money, you're producing resources for, like a central colony. So you actually are benefiting humanity in this really funny way. You're just competing with other companies to do it. But gameplay-wise, the thing that's kind of interesting about it is it's a real-time strategy game where you build different resource gathering or like manufacturing buildings that allow you to produce different types of resource. And the game has like an active market. So there's a list on the left side of your screen at all times showing like each of the commodities and the prices of those commodities. And as you produce and sell those things, like, or you buy them to like upgrade your buildings, like the prices will go up and down, like pretty directly with what you're doing. I mean, they have some interaction. Obviously, you don't know what the other players are doing. There are some other external forces that affect the market, but like let's say electricity is a commodity and it's going for $200 per unit or whatever. Like, if I build 2 power plants and start flooding the market with electricity, like the price is just going to bottom out. Like, I'm going to make a ton of money on the way there, but like eventually like the market's going to become flooded and electricity is going to not be worth that much anymore. So as a really dynamic, like interesting, so you're constantly trying to like adjust your production, like decide, do I want to get in this, do I want to mine silicon or do I want to produce electronics? Do I want to grow crops or do I want to, mine iron? Like it's a pretty interesting and dynamic system that feels like a real market simulator.
Nice. How long have you finished a full game of it?
Yeah, so I played all the skirmish missions and then 2 campaigns.
Okay, how long does a campaign take?
It's 7. It's 7 maps. On the difficulty I play at, I probably play 1 to 2 hours per map. So maybe about 10-ish
10,
hours.
15 hours.
Give or
Okay.
take. Probably
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious for my own knowledge.
Yeah. No, that's a cool game.
Nice.
Moving on to the last game in my list, a game we've mostly talked about, so I won't add a lot here, but Oxenfree. I mentioned it most surprising. Like, the game kind of grabbed me more than I expected. Ends up being pretty solid, well-rounded package. Like, has an interesting story and an interesting storytelling mechanic, and I do like the sort of unique way that you kind of have to make your dialogue decisions, most of them in real time, or semi-real time. So it's like you only have a few seconds sometimes to decide the kind of response you want to like interject into a certain conversation.
Yeah, which that could actually end up being a little frustrating for me because like sometimes I would want to think about something for like 5 seconds and they'd only give me 3 seconds, and like, in real life you would, in a conversation, like someone would see you're thinking about it, or you could still come back with that answer, but like it kind of gamingly blocks you off. Like once you miss your window, it's like you can never speak about that again. So, like, I really appreciate what they're trying for, and I think for the most part it works, but it was a little frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that is true that, like, I could see how that would put some people off, and, you know, sometimes it did feel slightly rushed, but at the same time, like, you're in a natural flow of conversation, you know. In some games, it definitely feels weird when you sit there and the conversation just stops, and you look at these three options for, like, 10 minutes.
The Skyrim style, you just two avatars sitting there staring blankly at each other for 10 minutes while you weigh your options.
Except in Skyrim, it didn't matter because you're probably going to stab them as soon as you're done anyway.
Probably.
Yeah, that's true.
All right.
That's it for me.
All right. So now that we've moved out of the Ryan block, now we move into the Flex and Nate block because I didn't play games this year, obviously. So P-Cross 3D Round 2, Mr. Flex.
P-Cross is the best. That's really the main thing you guys need to know.
All right.
But yeah, P-Cross is, I mean, it's a great handheld puzzle game, and this is the second 3D one, as the name implies, and they've added just enough, like, new mechanics to the 3D version of P-Cross that makes it a different thing. Like, there's been a lot of P-Cross games over the past few years, but most of them have just been kind of like, oh, here's more P-Cross puzzles, which... not necessarily a bad thing, because P-Cross is awesome, but this is the first one in a while that's felt like a worthwhile new take on P-Cross. And, I mean, the thing they've done for the 3D ones is they've added two colors, so there's two different ways to fill in blocks as you're sculpting the object you're trying to puzzle out.
Okay.
And otherwise, this game just continues to prove that P-Cross is pretty much the best puzzle game around.
Okay. So keeping with the handheld theme, I don't know how this didn't come up in any of our other categories, but Pokemon Sun and Moon, that was a really big handheld release this year.
It didn't come up for the same reason that, like, all of our other gameplay-focused games never came up.
Yeah, but it's just, you know, I mean, like, Pokemon Sun and Moon, hey, guess what? That's a good video game, and it sold 1 billion copies, and now we're going to talk about it for the next couple of minutes.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like Pokemon Sun and Moon a pretty good bit. You know, I think X and Y made a lot of big changes to that series, and Sun and Moon feels a little bit like smaller leaps. But I do like generally most of the new designs. I like the lack of HMs, and I think the ride Pokemon are a much better solution for that. I enjoyed the Island Challenge, I think it's called.
Team Skull.
Yeah, Team Skull is also great.
Probably one of the best.
Yeah, probably one of the best enemy factions in a Pokemon game. Yeah, I think that game does a lot of things well. It just doesn't really do anything amazing.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm still in the middle of it, because, like, I'm having a hard time mustering up the enthusiasm to play it. For whatever reason, maybe I've just played too many Pokemon campaigns, but its campaign is just thus far it's feeling like it's dragging. Right. But I mean, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily seem any worse than the other games. It's just, I don't know, it's just not grabbing me as much.
Yeah, if this was like a Gen 5 to Gen 6 translation, I could see it maybe even hitting some of the other lists, but because it's kind of like the third, even though it's technically Gen 7, it feels more like the third iteration in Gen 6 in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So, I mean, I enjoyed it, played through it and enjoyed it, but it less of a game changer than and you know, playing ORAS as well, that's sort of like the same type of campaign.
Right.
Yeah. I will say though that Pokemon Sun and Moon has Popplio in it, which automatically makes it pretty great.
I mean, it sounds like you're having trouble mustering up the energy to spend time with your Popplio, so maybe you made the wrong.
I mean, if I spend too much time with him, he'll evolve and not be Popplio anymore, and that would make me sad.
You're just gonna keep him as Popplio the whole game.
Yeah, just keep pressing B every time he tries to evolve. Just like, no, you will be Popplio forever.
It sounds like you might need to spend more time with him than like the Poke Care thing, doing the little face touching stuff.
No, they don't need care.
Oh, that's funny. So, I mean, I guess one of the big questions is, Since this is such an iterative series, and I think I know everyone's answer, you're always going to recommend the latest Pokemon game to someone that hasn't played Pokemon before. Is that still true with Sun and Moon?
I still would, like, even while I'm not enjoying the campaign as much, like, yeah, it's an iterative franchise, and I think I would still recommend it as the one to play for a newcomer. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say, which Ryan and Nate will appreciate this, is they nerfed Talonflame in Gen 7.
Yeah.
What was I haven't looked at all the balance changes, but I have noticed a couple of differences. What did they do?
So his ability Gale Wings, that gives priority to his flying moves.
Huh?
They changed the Gale Wings ability to say it gives priority to flying moves only when at full HP.
Terrible.
Yeah, and seeing as Brave Bird, the move everyone used with Gale Wings is a recoil move, you can use it at most once with priority.
Flame as well. This is a sad day.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't know if I can do this anymore.
But anyway, that's a little aside.
All right. So Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix is the next thing that we wanted to talk about. Flex, you want to talk about that one?
Rhythm Heaven has my heart. It's so good.
It sounds so happy.
Yeah, Rhythm Heaven's just amazing. And, like, this one was a little weird because a lot of it is... About half of the mini games in it are from previous games that have come out in the U.S., so only about half the mini games are new. At the same time, it has more total mini games, so the number of new is almost on par with the previous U.S. released Rhythm Heaven games. So there's still a lot of new content in there, and they just, they do what Rhythm Heaven does, give you really catchy and fun rhythm mini games, and I had a lot of fun playing this game. I even had fun replaying the games I had played before, so I like seeing both the new and the old content, and it's just a really nice and chunky Rhythm Heaven package. Okay. Rhythm Heaven's great.
Yeah.
Rhythm Heaven's great.
I've never played one, so I'll just take your word for it.
It's great.
Salt and Sanctuary.
It had some of the old songs in it, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
All right, moving on.
Sorry.
It's great.
Salt and Sanctuary, go.
Salt and Sanctuary is cool. It's like taking the Dark Souls formula and doing it in 2D, which is probably the most reductive way to say it, but
yeah,
that's basically what that game is going for, so I don't feel too bad.
It's reductive, but it's also accurate, and the developers would describe it that way too.
Yeah, I mean, they don't hide that fact at all, I don't think. I think it's cool. It's got, a lot of the same things you find in a Souls game. Very flexible stat system, big world to explore, lots of danger and difficult and frightening enemies, cool boss fights. I like that game a pretty good bit. I got pretty into it while I was playing it.
Yeah, I really this one was actually close to my personal top 10 because it's a 2D Dark Souls style game that does a lot of the good things that the Dark Souls games do. Like, they really hit a lot of those same notes, and I think it's like art style and stuff I might even like better than Dark Souls. Like, it has a really striking look to it.
Yeah, it has a little more personality, whereas Dark Souls' personality is super bleak and depressing. This one has a little bit more flavor to it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's also bleak and depressing, but...
It is, but also in a slightly cartoonish looking way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I don't know that I got into, like, the combat as much, and I think some of the currency stuff is a little weird. But
yeah.
I still really... Like, if you like Dark Souls style things, like, this would totally be up your alley. I think it's a really fun game.
The one thing I don't know about that game, and I don't know what kind of character you played when you played Assault and Sanctuary.
I played a hunter, I think.
Was that like a ranged character?
Yeah, it was a dex-based character. I think I used a lot of ranged stuff, and then I also used, like, spears, I think. I had some melee dex-based weapon that I used a lot.
I mean, it seems like that game has as much flexibility as, like, a Dark Souls does, because in Dark Souls, one of the best things is that you can really do any type of build you want, and they're mostly viable.
Yeah.
I also did a dex-based character in that game, but I got the impression that you could do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I got that impression as well. Some decent bosses, too.
Yeah.
Some maybe not as good as others, but...
Yeah.
And a lot of variety in the areas. For some reason, I don't know if it's just being 2D versus 3D, I found myself getting a little lost a little more. Like,
I definitely got lost a lot in that game. It feels weird because you don't have a map of any kind, which you
But
also
you don't in
have
Dark
a map
Souls
in
either.
Dark Souls. But I think maybe the 2D side-scrolling nature of it makes it a little harder for areas to wrap back in on themselves the way a Dark
Right.
Souls map does.
Yeah.
So
Maybe it
you're
just makes it
always-
hard to envision that space you're in by not being
Yeah.
3D. I don't know.
Yeah, and things always have to keep going along a continuum in one direction, whereas in 3D space you can kind of twist and turn things
Right.
in a little bit more compactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool game.
Well, if we would have had a category for longest title, I think our next game probably would have won Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse.
It's not long enough.
It's pretty long. I think it's just about the longest one that we've got so far.
It's not as long as the game itself.
JRPG, did it come out on 3DS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 3DS jam. This game was tough for me because this was my personal number 11. This was the tough cut that I really enjoyed it and wanted to put it on my list. But it turns out I played a lot of really good games this year, so something really good was going to have to get cut. And this was the one that just barely missed it. But I had never played. I played Persona 3 and Persona 4, but I'd never played a mainline Shin Megami Tensei game, so I had wanted to check it out, and this one got really good reception. So this was the one I dove in on, and I can see why it has the cachet that it does, because its combat system, as far as like turn-based JRPGs go, like might be one of my favorites. Like it does a really good job at making you like forcing you to consider and use all of your options, and like the way you can buy extra turns by exploiting weaknesses, and the way that status effects and stuff seem meaningful. Like all of that stuff makes for, I think, really solid turn-based combat. That whereas a lot of JRPGs you end up just kind of like button mashing your way through most regular encounters. Like this game, you have to be very thoughtful in all the encounters, and I think that's a really cool thing for it to do. I think its story is just a whole bunch of nonsense. And I think it drags on way longer than it should, which is probably an argument you could levy against a lot of JRPGs.
Yeah, some good JRPG nonsense in that game.
Some real good JRPG nonsense in that game. Absolutely. So like this is totally a JRPG that I play for the combat, and the demon fusioning system is really cool, which is present in a lot of the Shin Megami Tensei games, including spin-offs like Persona. So like that's where this game shines, is in the combat and like the customization and the demon fusioning stuff. Like you can really dig into some nuts and bolts, and I think it's a really strong dungeon crawler. I think it could have been tighter if they had, kept it not had it drag on so long. But if you're looking for like a good, solid JRPG style dungeon crawler, like this is as good as it gets, I feel like.
Yeah, I just opened up the Wikipedia page, and I'm not going to read any of the plot summary for fear of spoilers, but I didn't just sort of glancing over it, I see Kingdom of God, Satan, Lucifer, Cosmic Egg, and Divine Powers. So it definitely sounds like a JRPG.
It is a whole bunch of JRPG nonsense.
So the next thing that we're going to talk about is, or the Flexus is going to talk about, is Steven's sausage roll. Why is this here?
Hey guys, you like sausages?
Sausages are all right.
Yeah,
who wants to roll some sausages with me?
Good stuff.
No,
Maybe.
I don't at all.
I need more information.
Yeah, you do.
Let's keep it G-rated here, fellas.
Oh, I think I know what you guys want. So, this is also a really good name for a video game, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
So this is a really clever puzzle game that's on Steam, where literally, so every single puzzle is, you're this guy named Steven, and there are these giant sausages on the ground, and somewhere in the level there are like these grills in the ground, and you have to roll the sausages over the grill to cook them. The catch is, there are 4 like different portions of the sausage that need to be grilled, and each one needs to be grilled exactly once, or else it's overcooked and burned. So it's all this like maneuvering the sausage around these like very meticulously designed levels to cook the sausage perfectly. And there can be more than one sausage in some levels, and they really play around with the level design a lot. And they do a really good job of taking very simple mechanics and getting a ton of mileage out of it. Like, this is one of the most smartly designed puzzle games I think I've played in a long time. Like, it's really neat.
Okay, and is this Steam? Is it the? Yep. Okay, all right.
It's a steamer.
How far did you make it? Because I know you showed me a few of them.
Yeah.
And it looked pretty gnarly. Like,
yeah,
really tough.
It gets real hard real quick. I didn't really play much past what you saw, and I have absolutely no idea how far in the game that is. Like, I probably played 5 to 10 hours, I would guess. That's just purely off the top of my head. I don't know. But yeah, it gets real hard real quick. Like, this is a puzzle game. This is a puzzle game for puzzle game fans. It is not quote unquote my first puzzle game material. It's pretty intense stuff.
So it sounds like it is the anti-Paul game. So that's good to know.
This is not what I would recommend for Paul.
Sausages, right?
Puzzle games. Yeah.
Hey Paul,
not even
do you like sausages?
No, but Thumper, I do like Thumper. We've talked about Thumper a couple of times in the other categories. What do you guys have left that you wanted to say about Thumper?
Yeah, the main thing for me is, like, it's a fun rhythm game, and, like, I think a lot of the sound and the visual design really play into that as well. But, like, as a package, like, it's one of those rhythm games that you, like, almost get into this trance playing. Like, it just kind of, like, everything kind of melds into just this experience that you really get into. And, like, when the few times I got on a roll playing it, like, were probably some of the most fun moments I had playing any game this year.
Okay.
Like, there are parts of it that are certainly a little rough, and the game as a whole is fairly one note, but like, it's able to do what some of the best rhythm games can do, which is just kind of get you in that zone.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to like that game a lot more than I ended up liking it. I just could not really get into it much past the halfway point. But I appreciate what that game is. I think it's a cool looking, cool sounding thing. I just could not get into the act of playing it.
Yeah, and I will say it's not, my favorite rhythm game by any stretch, and it has problems, but I think it does some really cool stuff.
Okay.
And it does get pretty hard towards the end.
Well, that just about wraps up our final shout-outs that we wanted to talk about before we got into our Game of the Year discussion. I just want to check round table, make sure there's nothing else that anyone thought of while we were going through the list that you wanted to say anything else about before the real fun begins.
I'm ready for fun.
Let's get into it.
All right.
Got
well,
my face ready.
Man, you better, because you know what? We're coming for Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. All right.
rolling my intimidate checks here.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to get into our Game of the Year discussion, where we're going to present you with an ordered list of our 10 favorite games of the year. So we'll be back right after this. It's time. It's time to get into the Game of the Year. Bum, bum, bum.
It's the moment you've all been waiting for.
Yep. So what we currently have is 20 games down. And we're going to have to cut 10 of these before getting into our top 10 favorite games of the year. So I'm just going to read you this list. It's just in alphabetical order. So we have at the top Dark Souls 3, Darkest Dungeon, Doom, Fire Emblem Fates Conquest, Firewatch, Forza Horizon 3, Fury, Hitman, Hyper Light Drifter, Inside, Overwatch, Sid Meier's Civilization 6, Stardew Valley, Superhot, Titanfall 2, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE, Tyranny, The Witness, Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, and XCOM 2.
And we basically got this list by all of us saying what we think should be in the top 10.
Yeah, it's probably worth clarifying that the final list, if we have time to rank it, is going to be a lot of consensus
Yeah.
building here. So it might look very funny from an individual perspective.
It will look amazing.
List by committee. It's the
Yep.
best kind of list.
So we
but-
start with 20 games that we all think should be in the top 10, and now we have to eliminate half of those.
Yeah, individually, someone on this panel thought each of these games, at least one person thought any given game was one of their 10 favorite games of the year.
Right.
Yep.
All right, so let's start spilling some blood.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know. I feel like that we had some really good arguments about why XCOM 2 was not as good as XCOM 1 and also had a lot of technical issues and other things like that. So maybe we should start that conversation there, because I feel like in the last few days there were a lot of really negative things said about XCOM 2. So what do we think about making that one of the early ones on the chopping block?
I'm going to veto that pretty hard. And I think, from what I got in the most disappointing conversation, although you caught some disappointment, I think the consensus was probably still that it was a good game. Maybe I misread that, but I know for me personally, it was a very good game. I would not want to see that be an early cut, if a cut at all.
It may not make this list because there are disappointing things about it, but it's one of my 10 favorite experiences of the year. Like, even with its disappointment, like the original XCOM Enemy Unknown is one of my favorite games ever. So it was starting from a high bar. So being a disappointment from that is still disappointing, but still makes it better than most video games.
It's like Bloodborne not being Dark Souls.
Right, like it's still good. And on top of that, like there are at least 2 other games on this list that I actively did not like, and one of which was the winner of our most disappointing.
Which was what?
Darkest Dungeon.
Okay.
Yeah.
XCOM 2 may or may not make our list, but there are other games I would cut first, one of which would be Darkest Dungeon.
Talking about, is that where we're going now? Are we just
think
going
that's where I'm
straight
going.
there?
I think that's what's happening.
I think Nate might be on board with me of this, but that's one of the few. This is actually one of the only games I played this year that I disliked so much that I did not want to finish it. And it started out great. There are good ideas in there, but it got worse. So
Let's
it
clarify.
fell down so quickly.
So do you like roguelike games?
Not typically.
Okay.
Oh, well, I like their ideas, but the overall roguelike structure I generally don't care for because I feel like it makes things grindy and waste your time.
Whereas alternatively, I feel like it mixes up the experience and rewards you for learning the mechanics more than like fixed procedures.
So to be clear, I learned Darkest Dungeon's mechanics, and that was my favorite part of that game. But I think it's the structure around that game that drags those mechanics down. And I actually think Darkest Dungeon was, at least the part of it I played, was fairly easy, which made doing the grind feel less appealing because it felt like I was just going through the motions.
I mean, I'm not going to fight to the death over Darkest Dungeon because it does have its flaws, and it's not even top 5 for me. And I know with 4 of us on this panel, we're really, in theory, only going to be getting about 3 games apiece in some ways. But at the same time, I don't want to.
Well, excluding crossover, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, if we all got an even cut, that would be like 2.5 games per person. But I mean, I do want to give this game some defense in that it was a fun roguelike, and for the first round of bosses and maybe through the second round, kind of towards the second round of bosses were when I really started feeling like it was the drag and the grind. I know you didn't make it that far, but I would chalk some of that up.
I finished one round of bosses and then saw what the rest of the game was and said nope. And I've been the one saying most of the negative stuff here, but if Nate was to rip into it, he might feel even worse about it than I do, from what I remember Nate saying at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't enjoy my time with Darkest Dungeon at all. I think the game does do really cool stuff thematically, and I really like the style of it and the look of it. And I like some of the systems they have. I thought the combat system was neat. It's sort of the fast-paced, action-y RPG style, and I never dug super far into that. but I could tell that there was a lot going on there, and mixing classes and upgrading them in different ways seemed like there was going to be some depth there for sure. So I don't know, because I didn't play a whole lot of it. I don't know how much, like, Ryan, you said that by the end of the second round of bosses, you felt like maybe you had seen everything, and then, what was it, one more round to reach the end? Is that how it works? Okay.
Yeah, the way the game plays is basically you have these 4 bosses in the same areas, and that is definitely one of the weaknesses of the game, is
Right.
that to play through the game, it's a punishing game, but it punishes you mostly by time. And play through the same areas basically until you beat these bosses, and then you do that 2 more times,
Right.
and then there's a final area, the darkest dungeon. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it for the first couple rounds, but I think it didn't have a lot of variety. I think that's a fair criticism.
Sure.
It did have a really nice. I guess the thing I'll say in its defense, but then we can cut it because this isn't something I think that's worth fighting over. I mean, the style and narration and things were kind of interesting, but
Yeah.
the thing that was kind of appealing to me is I do like roguelike games a lot, and in that first playthrough, it definitely had like a very fine-tuned, like kind of on the skin of your teeth feel of like just a challenging roguelike game with it had turn-based combat as opposed to or certain games that have action-based combat, but it felt like a really fine-tuned turn-based dungeon crawler. And I mean, it pretty much kept that feel through the game, but that's because it didn't really do much variety-wise.
Right.
The other thing is that there were a few cool moments that created, like in other roguelikes where things just go down and you're in this really tough battle. I remember one battle I walked out of where like 2 of my guys had died and I had almost killed the boss, and one of my guys like hit the like stress check, and instead of like going crazy, he actually like he kind of like hulked out and had like a virtue moment, and then he was able to kind of carry the rest of the fight, whereas it was looking like I was just going to get wiped and lose 4 of the best guys. So you definitely had some pretty cool moments.
That actually kind of bummed me out in a way. The way that mechanic worked is like when you get to that last hit thing, like when your health goes away, and because I don't know what the percent chance is, but I think at that point it's like anytime you get hit, there's just a dice roll and you either die or don't die. And I had one encounter where it worked out in my favor, where like I had one person get to that stage and he got attacked like 5 times and succeeded on the dice roll every time, but that made me feel like the game just threw me a bone and I just lucked my way through an encounter that I should not have won, and then I had it go the other way other times too, and it made the game feel like more a roll of the dice than I would have preferred it to.
Yeah, it seems like that game has a lot of dice rolls, and 1 or 2 things going against you or in your favor could swing things to either go really well or really badly for you very quickly, which, I mean, that's sort of how a lot of roguelikes operate, I think. Like, if things can go bad almost immediately, and then you have to sort of recuperate from that and re-attack the problem. So I think that is something that is just sort of a roguelike thing in some ways. But yeah, I mostly agree with what you're saying about it.
So anyway, I mean, this is a game. If everybody's against it, then I definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it on this list for sure, but.
All right, so Darkest Dungeon is our
see where the cursor's at now.
Is our first elimination. Well, I nominated XCOM, so it's time for someone else to nominate something.
How do we feel about Overwatch?
Definitely willing to let that one go.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right, that was easy.
Was that an easy one? Overwatch is really cool.
I don't even know why that's on here, but sure.
Good job, Nate.
Yeah,
I mean,
Overwatch
it's a
is
good
really
game,
cool.
right?
Yeah,
It is a good game. Yeah, I don't want to disparage it.
There are a lot of people who make that their game of the year. I don't necessarily feel that way, but also my play group is not there, right? So, but it was a fun game.
Yeah, it is a very fun game. I think it's also very one note, like it does its thing.
Yeah.
and it does that thing really well, and it has a lot of personality to it. But it's just I didn't get that into its one thing.
Yeah. I think it has a lot of depth there, and it's very easy to access and have fun with. Sort of a lot of Blizzard games do. Easy to learn, difficult to master kind of thing.
They took that style of Team Fortress shooter and they polished it and made it for the everyman.
Yeah, they applied the Blizzard magic to it, and that's what came out. And Overwatch is a really cool game that I still haven't played it really since the summer, but I still like kind of halfway follow what's happening in that game. So like when new characters come out, I want to know what their abilities are and stuff. And I could see playing some more of it at some point, but I don't think it hangs in this top 10.
Okay, that was easy. I don't know. Like I'm having a hard time with some of these because like I didn't play them. But I kind of wonder, not that it's a bad game, but I wonder if Tyranny is going to hold up just with the other stuff that's on the list. There's a lot of good games on the list, and that's the only one that I'm kind of settling on. Going, that's a little bit more of a niche than some of the other genres are. So
we're going 3 for 3 with Ryan picks. I'm cool with that. Like,
no, I didn't know whose pitch Overwatch was.
And let's say. Like being a niche thing isn't a bad thing.
No, I'm just wondering.
And I do want to stay away from like if it's only one person on that played it, we all just say we have to get rid of it. But
I mean, Overwatch, I didn't know whose pick that was because we all played it.
Yeah, I don't remember if I put that on here or not, but yeah. Anyway, so we can talk about Tyranny.
That's okay. I mean, honestly, like I've kind of said my piece about it, and I'm not gonna fight hard to keep. I think we do have to do this exercise where we realize that kind of the bottom halves of all of our lists are kind of primed to get cut, which this was in my bottom 5. Yeah, that's true. But
the one thing I was going to ask, and I definitely want to hear why hear your spiel on Tyranny, but I think it'll be hard for both Tokyo Mirage and Tyranny to get on here, and I think I know which one you like better.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a good point. I'm going to fight harder to keep my top games on than my bottom games. And Tyranny was definitely one of my top 10. Like it was comfortably in my top 10, but at the same time, I recognize that there are a lot of other good games, including, like you mentioned, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which I would rather have on this list. So yeah, I mean, I gave the spiel when I talked about narrative about how it, you have this really cool setting and you have a lot of important decisions, and then you couple that with kind of like the traditional like Baldur's Gate Pillars of Eternity like combat engine that works pretty well. Like it's not amazing or revolutionary, but it's interesting enough, and you have some RPG choices to make there and party management things to do that. But really what carried Tyranny for me was the narrative, which I talked about. But since we're having to make cuts, like I'm definitely willing to give this one up, especially if nobody else has a love for what it does.
It's hard since none of us have played it except for you. I mean, we definitely recognized it in narrative. I think if you feel strongly that it's in the top 10, and especially if there are like any other like maybe there are gameplay reasons that we haven't talked about yet that you think make a strong case for it, then I'm willing to leave it on for now. But I'm going to leave that on you, Ryan, to make that case.
I mean, honestly, with the list as it is, I think it's going to be tough to hold it on this list. There are a couple other things I know I definitely would like to see, and we've got a pretty large list. But let's pick something that's not directly one of mine next.
Okay, fair enough.
The other thing I was going to say about Tyranny is like, I have not played Tyranny, but I played Pillars, and I like Pillars a lot, and I probably like Tyranny as well. At the same time, like if it doesn't necessarily do anything that company hasn't been doing for a while, then it might not be as like stand out a pick as some of these other games.
Right. That's fair.
All right, Ron. So what do you think probably shouldn't be in our joint top 10?
Let me take a look here. I can see a couple games that are question marks. I know. So I guess let's talk about talk about super hot.
Super.
Super hot.
Best
Where does
style.
that sit? Like so that one I don't think even made my list.
So that
So where does
yeah,
that sit? With
we
you
we
and
can definitely
Nate?
talk about it. That's one I'm going to be pretty strong on. We're gonna have to make hard cuts at some point, but I don't know. I'm not willing to let that go yet.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I have some detractions against it.
Sure.
It is really short. I mean, that's one thing. And granted, gameplay length does not necessarily equate to being a good game, but there is something to be
And
said.
sometimes
Amount of
being long
content
can make a
is
game worse too.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, amount of
Yeah.
content is, I think, a reasonable thing to talk about. But I mean, we can talk about other things. Maybe put that in the maybe bucket.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have a super hot fight at some point. We can have that now or later.
Let's get the list short down a little bit more.
All right.
Or
So why don't you pick another one then?
Let's see. Okay, 2 other games that I have on my mind. We'll start with. So, how strongly do you feel about Forza Horizon 3 Flex? That sounded like it maybe was like a sort of bottom of your list type pick.
It's a middle of my list pick.
Okay.
I feel stronger about it than a lot of games. There's exactly one game on this list that I think needs to go, and we can not bring it up now if we don't want to. But I am okay.
You're gonna pick on another one of mine.
I think it is.
Well, I don't know whose it is, but if I had to guess, it might be yours.
I think I know which one it is.
I think
so.
Nate knows which one it is.
Uh,
Forza Horizon 3, I think 100% is one of the 10 best games of the year. I think in some ways there's a case to be made that Forza Horizon 3 is the best driving game ever made. I personally like Burnout better, but I think Forza Horizon does an amazing job at being a great driving game for everyone. And I think that aspect of Forza Horizon is more impressive in the sense that it's broader than just driving games as well. If you think about how many games, like there are a lot of games that are great for being very specific things for very specific people, and then there are a lot of games that kind of try to be the game for all people. And I think a lot of the times when games try and do that, it kind of falls flat and doesn't really appeal to anyone enough. But I think Forza Horizon 3 is one of the best examples of a game trying to appeal to everyone and doing it. Like, I think unless you just hate racing games, period, you can have a good time with Forza Horizon 3. Like, I think it does a great job at just being a fun racing game no matter how you approach it. And I think that world looks fantastic. It has a ton of content. All of the driving styles feel great. All of the cars feel great. Like, I think that this game is the total package for a driving game.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has a lot of good stuff in it. The knock I would say against it for my part, from what I played, is that I didn't. There are a lot of events and things to do in that game, and I think you're right that there is something that everybody can enjoy. But there were very few events that I really liked. Like, there were a lot of different things in that game that I didn't care to do. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what all the different event types were other than just races. But there
were races, there were all the different types of stunt events, like the which were my favorites, like hitting the ramps, doing the speed checks, like those kind of things.
Yeah. And some of those were fun and good because they just sort of incorporated into the open world of it.
Yeah. And how about just driving around the open world?
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. Like, when I played that game, the most fun I had was just driving around, and then if I saw a speed trap, I would try and break the record that I had on whatever. But whenever I came time to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to complete some stuff and unlock some stuff, and then I would go to like event after event, and it would kind of bog me down a little bit.
If you do a bunch of events in a row, it does start feeling samey.
Yeah.
At the same time, for my money, there was just enough variety in the events that I think I played that game for almost 30 hours, and that's a large chunk of time. And, like, you could go more. I didn't do everything. You could go less. Like, if you played that game for 15 hours, like, I think you could still get enough of it. It's kind of, like, that's a game you can kind of mold to what you want to do.
And that's exactly what I did. I did not play that game as much as you, but I still had a good time with it.
Right.
But I eventually kind of just hit that wall where I was like, I've done all these different things enough that I don't need to do it anymore.
And that's kind of my point, is like everyone's going to have the different bar that they reach, But I sincerely believe that unless you just don't like driving games, that everybody will have a fun time with this game, like you said you did. You know, you may only have fun with it for, I don't know, 10, 15 hours. I may have fun with it for 30 hours. I'm sure someone else there has had fun with this game for 100 hours or more. But, like, everyone's going to have different levels of fun, but I think everyone will have fun. Like, I have a hard time imagining someone who has any appreciation for driving games just not liking this game.
So, this may not be a fair or comparison that's worth making, but so say, you know, you could play Forza Horizon 3 for 10 hours or 30 hours or 100 hours, and then that's a bonus. But we just talked about Darkest Dungeon that went on too long. You could have played one round of bosses and maybe had fun with that, but we completely held that against that game.
Right, because you don't get the you don't get the character progression in the way you want it by only playing one round of bosses. Like, you get a very stunted character growth, whereas Forza Horizon, because it's not relying on upgrades like that and like Darkest Dungeon is a lot of the interesting part of its design is in its progression, and it's stretching out that progression too thin. Forza Horizon, by being a driving game, is not couched in progression. It's a very different kind of game.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think they are slightly different, but I think the argument still stands for me that I just got a little tired of playing that game after what I played of it, and that doesn't mean it's a terrible game. I still enjoyed it, like I said, but that is
and I got tired of it.
Yeah,
I got tired of it after what I played of it as well, but what I got out of it was a lot.
Right. So I don't.
Middle of the list, best driving game ever. It's maybe a top 10 2016 game, maybe not.
I am willing to see it go because I know I'm on an island here, but I think this game is a lot better than it's getting credit for from everyone else.
And I'm not trying to disparage it. I think that game is really good, and especially visually, and the nature of its open world are super strong.
Yeah, its world is really good. Like, I mean, I like Burnout Paradise better as a game, but I actually think Forza Horizon 3 world might be better.
Right. So
I mean, we could put like Super Hot. Let's just put a little note by it.
I mean, I don't think that game's gonna make it, but we can leave it for now if you want.
Yeah, I don't think it'll make it just because of this crowd, but I think it's a really strong game.
All right, so sounds like we're gonna strike Forza Horizon 3, and now I don't know. Stuff's starting to get hard.
I know where we're going next.
I can make a suggestion. Well, would you like to go first, Flex?
Go for it, Ryan.
So this was a game on my list, but it was towards the bottom, and I'm guessing it's on some of your lists as well. Hyper Light Drifter. Like, how do we feel about that competing against some of the other games and this list?
I could see that potentially being a long shot consensus pick for a low spot, because I think we all liked it, but I don't know that it's particularly near and dear to any of us.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel, is that I think it kind of probably hit all of our lists somewhere pretty low, or maybe just off in the honorable mention territory, but
that's where it landed for me. It landed just off of my list. Like, it's good.
And it is on my list too.
So I could see that being a consensus pick.
But if it were a matter of making sacrifices for, arguably better games or more preferred games, like I could potentially give up Hyper Light Drifter.
It might not end up making it, but I think there are a few games that could probably end up going first.
Okay, so we'll just put a star. We'll just put a star next to Hyper Light Drifter, as that's one that, if we get down and we have 11 games on the list or 12 games on the list and we still need to cut one, that might be a good one just to kind of come back to as a sacrificial lamb.
Just to make sure, were we okay with Forza Horizon 3 being crossed off? I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if we get to around our 10 and I feel like there's some wiggle room, I might resurrect it, but...
I feel your pain, Flex.
All right.
I've had it 3 times already. I think you're about to hit me again. Just put the knife in my heart. I know where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, I know I gotta lose some.
I got your back, Ryan.
I appreciate it. I thought you would, Nate.
I have on the order of 3 or 4 things that I'm going to be adamant about on this list. and one of them is that Fury does not make this list.
I knew that's where he was going.
Yep.
I will put a stake in the ground for this one. This is a hill I will die on.
Fury's
I
pretty
could be that way about Doom.
But you didn't. See, Fury is the only game left on this list that I played and actively did not like. You can't say that about Doom.
I don't know if
we'll break the Doom out.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably not a good way.
Probably
to
not fair.
This. No, that's not. But still, the point being, I do not think Fury is one of the 10 best experiences of the year. Like, there are a lot of really good games on this list, and there are well more than 10 of them that are stronger than Fury. And like, I fully understand your guys' appreciation for Fury, but I also think that game has substantial problems that a lot of these other games do not hit.
So Nate, would you like to go first, or?
I can say my piece about Fury. I'm not going to be heartbroken if I see it go, but I do think that game is really cool. I really like the style of that game. It's very anime, weird action game. I also just tend to enjoy this style of like big boss fights. That style of game always appeals to me, at least somewhat. And I actually like the character designs and environments and like the walking sections that I know are going to be a contentious point here. He's shaking his head. I actually really like those sections as like weird cooldowns between bosses.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt 100% the same way.
And I think that game is fun to play. I really do. I think that dodging and countering and charging up your strikes to knock bosses out of their patterns is really, really fun and satisfying all the way through. I think those battles are epic and sometimes a little long to a fault, but they are always super satisfying when you are able to strike those final blows. That's pretty much my spiel on why I think Fury is really cool. I think, Ryan, you probably even like it more than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo like some of the points that Nate made about Fury, and that for what rough edges it had, it just ended up being a great experience. Like, it has a really cool style. It has this kind of curious anime-ish setting, like Nate mentioned, that it's not like a deep story, but you get to unravel a little bit of the mystery. But yeah, really where that game shines is just it has a lot of interesting boss fights that kind of toggle between these almost like fighting game-ish segments where you're blocking, countering, dodging, attacking, and then these more like bullet hell segments where you're kind of like dodging around a bunch of bullets and trying to shoot back. And it had some pretty cool moments in it too. Like in some of the boss fights, like each of the bosses represents a different character, like who wants to see your main character like not leave this prison for a different reason. And in particular, that last boss fight, like it comes off as kind of a surprise and a bit of an interesting moment, like in terms of, I guess, the game's kind of like limited story. There's a little bit of a moment there, like.
When you say the last boss fight, do you mean before the credits or the after credits secret boss?
I mean the before the credits.
Okay.
The one that ends up being a lot different, I guess, than the other boss fights.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and then like Nate mentioned, the walking segments like that, Flex, you really didn't like those, but for me, I thought
they're terrible.
I thought it was great because
they are really cool.
You have these intense boss fight segments, and you finish it up, and it's like, oh man, I need a cooldown, and so you get to this section where and I mean, if you want to, you can just let your guy go, like you just press the auto button.
That's what I did every time.
If you don't want to play a video game, this is a great segment for you.
So it's like I just finished. Oh, that's reductive.
That's not fair.
It's like saying you can't read text or watch a cutscene.
That's called pacing.
In any video game. Yeah. It's
exactly.
like saying cutscenes are horrible.
I mean, this isn't Quantum Break we're talking about here. You're not watching a 30-minute television show in the middle of your gameplay. I mean, this sounds like a short a short walking section just to give the player a minute to breathe. That
Yeah.
sounds like good pacing to me.
Yeah, and there's
that's
narration.
exactly what it is.
And there's narration that kind of gives you a little backstory.
Yeah.
There's an environment. The environments I didn't think were super special, but it was just kind of a neat little environment. You're walking out of this prison, and so you finish a really intense boss fight segment. You let the guy go on auto, and then you listen to the narration and just kind of warm up for the next one. Like, I thought that was great pacing for that game.
Yeah, and it also does give you a chance to listen to the amazing soundtrack.
Well, the good songs don't play during the walking parts.
Well, but most of the songs I would say are good. Maybe not the best songs during those parts, but I would say most of the soundtrack is good.
So, I mean, from my perspective, like, top half for me, if it gets cut, maybe, because there's a lot of other games on this list, but I would like to see some other games go before we cut my fourth game on the list.
All right, I'm ready.
Picks.
Can I? It's my turn.
You just nominated that one.
Are you gonna?
No,
nominate
to
one of
talk
your-
about why I want it gone. I
Okay,
haven't said
yeah.
anything about this game
Yeah,
yet.
go for it.
Yeah, so I do like the soundtrack. I think there are some good songs. I like the idea of a good boss rush game, and I think there are moments when this game works okay and that those boss fights can be fun. I think those walking segments, like every single time those walking segments started, and they took 5 to 10 minutes a piece. They are long. And every time they started, I literally set my controller down and would go do something else because they were too long for me. Like when I sat down to play Fury, I wanted to play Fury. And it would have been more bearable if I thought the story was good at all, but I literally got nothing from that story. Like that story is you're escaping from a prison, and those walking scenes are your like silent protagonist, like emo dude, just walking down a hallway, and the guy wearing a bunny hat is like just talking to you, and he never says anything specific. He's like, "Oh, how do you feel now? Was that satisfying? Like you're one step closer to escaping from this prison." And then he like gets on these weird like semi-philosophical, but like mostly just kind of comes off as like adolescent like attempts at badassery that like it did nothing for me. Like there's nothing about those scenes that add to the narrative. And like it felt like to me the game was trying to be cool in the way like a teenager would try and be cool, and none of it came across as anything that worked. Like it just came across as being very silly. The style I do like overall. I think technically there's some rough edges. Like there's a lot of clipping in those scenes where like hair is going through your clothes and that kind of stuff. But I do like the style overall. I think it works. And then also the combat. When it works, it's fine, but I think like for how precise of an action game this is, it needs to be on point more than it is. So the dodge button, there are two dodge buttons. You can use X on the PS4 controller or one of the triggers. The way dodging works is if you hold the dodge, you charge up a larger dodge, and you don't actually dodge until you release the button. So if you just want to do a quick dodge by tapping, using the triggers has too much throw on it, so that there's actually a delay in your dodge because it happens on release. So doing the triggers for a quick dodge is almost impossible to do effectively if you have a tight window. Trying to use X for a quick dodge is tricky because you need to use the right thumbstick to aim your dual joystick style shots, and also the X button to do a quick dodge. So I ended up playing the game with a very uncomfortable claw style position where my thumb was on the right thumbstick and my pointer finger, my index finger, was on the X button, and that was really uncomfortable. So I think there's some weird control issues that make it tough. And then past that, like while some of the boss fights are fine, like I think on the whole they're not necessarily doing anything that much more special than like other bullet hell style things have done before. And I think by making the boss fights so long is also a tricky thing because they are long, intense boss fights, and playing one for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or however long they can take, and like not being sure what you have to do and then figuring it out only a few seconds too late, and then having to start the entire 40-minute boss fight over again and then breezing through it the second time because you figured out what to do, like that feels kind of like a waste of time. Like I would have rather there been, I don't know, either more shorter boss fights or something to make that learning more rewarding instead of just making you replay easy segments. Because I did a whole lot of that game because the bosses are in multiple stages, and I did a whole lot in what I played of going through the early easy parts without losing any of my health chunks, and just doing that over and over, and it just felt like that slog was not enjoyable at all to get to the hard part that I was trying to figure out. And the hard part could be the more enjoyable part, but having to slog through the easy parts was just a pain. So like, I do think there are cool ideas in there. I don't think this is an atrociously bad game, but when I think we're talking about the top 10 games of the year, there are enough things that just rub me the wrong way that there are a lot of good games on this list, and I don't think it hangs.
So, I mean, my final position is the same. I want to see other things get cut first before Fury. I mean, I will contradict the part about the narration. I mean, sometimes it was intentionally vague, but the character talking to you would also tell you about, a little bit of the person you're about to fight, a little bit about the person you just fought, like why the prison was built, why he did what he did. Like, I mean, it was intentionally vague, but there was definitely a lot of useful information, story-wise information. I mean, if you didn't like the story, you didn't like the
it was intentionally vague to the point where I didn't get anything out of it.
But he told you about the characters you were fighting and about the prison and about why he was basically helping you escape, and all that. So I would not say that there's nothing in there. And the boss fights I thought were varied enough for that type of game. But anyway, like I said, I would rather see other things get cut first because we're thinning out the Ryan list pretty aggressively here.
I think that's the only Ryan one I have left to go for, though.
Good. So, that one might end up getting cut. I probably will let that one go eventually, but I would like to see a few other things go before I release the grip on Fury.
What about no, never mind. I know what the answer to that question is going to be.
How do you feel about Uncharted 4, Nate?
I really liked Uncharted 4. I think that game is a super impressive, I guess, finale to a series that had sort of ended previously on a sort of dull note and came back stronger than it had been before, I think. So in that sense, I really like that this game happened and is as good as it is. I don't know that I'm going to make a huge case for it to be on this list. For me...
I like it a lot, too, and I think it's a great end for that franchise.
Yeah.
It is, like, gameplay-wise, still very much more of that, and...
Yeah.
Just a very standard action-adventure kind of thing.
Yeah, gameplay-wise, it doesn't do anything new or great. I think, a couple of the bigger environments that you go through in that game are more interesting than a lot of the stuff they've done in previous Uncharted games.
Yeah, there are some really cool environments in there.
In that you can approach them more like a small sandbox level, by climbing around before you've been detected, trying to scope things out, take out people silently.
And they did do the silent takedowns. That is the one thing they improved a lot in this game, I think.
Yeah. So I think you do have a little bit more agency in how you approach some of the better gameplay sections of that game than in previous games in the Uncharted series. I don't think that makes a huge difference, but it definitely helped me enjoy that game more than I expected. And then, just the narrative that we've talked a lot about already, so we won't go through all of that again, but those performances and the technology running that game are so impressive, and the writing as well. I just can't say good enough things about those characters and their story and the way that whole thing shakes out.
Yeah, from like a narrative and presentation standpoint, like this game's pretty much unmatched on all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
But it's the part where you play it that falls down.
But if we want to make this a consensus cut to get moving here, I'm not going to fight about it, but that game is definitely one of my top 10, and I think it's really, really good.
I don't know. I mean, I almost feel like that we made such a strong case for the parts before where I'd almost wonder, it's like, okay, Are we cutting it just to move on? Because like I think that there's something that there's something special about a game that came out that looked as good as that one did and told the story as well as that one did. So I'd be more interested to hear, like, if we're going to cut that, then are we saying that something like Civ 6, which is the sixth iteration in that franchise, is, should be on the list? Because I'd almost rather see us cut Civ 6 before Uncharted 4.
I would play Civ 6 over Uncharted 4 any day of the week.
Well, that's because you're a huge Civ fan, which is fine. But Civ 6 is, I mean, it's a great game. But if you compare it head to head with Uncharted 4, are you gonna say that Civ 6 is higher on your list? I mean, is it higher on everyone's list?
It's like 15 higher on my list. But I mean, we don't want to get into that game.
Did anybody
Civ 6.
Did anybody else play Civ 6? Nate, did you play Civ 6?
Yeah, I did, and I also really like that game. Picking between those two is not a big difference for me. They're very, very different. What Uncharted does it really impressively in terms of narrative and presentation, like we just said, and then Civ 6 is just that really, really well put together strategy game with just layers of cool mechanics and refinements. Picking between those, it's not a strong argument for me.
Civ 6 in a way is simultaneously one of the least impressive Civs, but also potentially the best launch edition of Civ that we've had, because it basically is taking a lot of what Civ has done and it's refining it into just a really solid package. And it's not going to blow anyone away necessarily who's played a lot of Civ, especially 4 and 5, because I think 3 to 4 was probably the biggest jump.
Yeah.
But it irons out a lot of stuff around the edges in a way that, where Civ 5 or something, you came in at vanilla at launch and said, this is a good base, but it needs work. Civ 6 right out the gate just has everything and works. And it's I played 2 games of this right after it came out, and from start to finish, those games were fun for the entire way through. And I think it's a really strong iteration of the Civ formula. And that said, the downside is it is very much an iteration.
Yeah.
Right. I hear what you're saying, that it was very polished when it first came out in a way that, Civ 5 wasn't. But I've also heard the argument on the other side, which is, the fully expanded and patched out Civ 5 to release Civ 6 is they're still pretty close. Which,
yeah, they're close.
But I mean, if they're close, and you're going from a numbered release to a numbered release, but they're still pretty close. Yeah, I know Civ 6 will get better and we'll have more stuff as time goes on and they release more content for it. But I think that hurts it to get onto a top 10 list for Game of the Year if it's relatively close to what its predecessor was.
So I'll say 2 things about Civ 6, 1 pro and 1 con, I guess. The pro, the thing that I think the game does that is a meaningful advancement is the unstacking cities idea, which is that instead of all of your buildings just going into one tile, which is your city, you build different districts in the tiles surrounding your city and put the buildings that relate to that district in that. So you have a military encampment and all your military buildings go into that, and then you have a religious district and all of your religious buildings go into that. And I think that's a really crazy, smart gameplay design decision for the Civ franchise for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I was most excited about when they launched or announced this game and showed that, and that's still the thing that I think is the most impressive about that game. And that's why I'm more excited about playing Civ 6 going forward with whatever they do for that than I would be going back to play 5.
Yeah, it is an iteration, but the iterations they've made are important. They have made iterations to make Civ continue to be relevant and worth updating and making new Civ games rather than just, keep going along with Civ 5. Like,
Right.
This is an iterative game, but it's a meaningful iteration in a way that keeps Civ fresh and modern and relevant.
Right.
Then
And-
I'll say on the flip side, one of the first things I hope they change is the policy cards.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
are not good and confusing and unwieldy, and every time I've played this game so far, I've just kind of, my eyes glaze over when that screen pops up and I just pick something because I don't want to look at it anymore.
Yeah, that's fair.
And like I definitely get what you're saying about they've modernized the platform, and that Civ 6 is now a thing that is going to be relevant for a good amount of time moving forward. I'm just making you think about, and also making you justify that we're talking about what Civ 6 is right now and not what it will be in 3 years. Because
I think right now it's already good, like
Right.
good enough to be in this conversation. And I will also say, like, think about how many franchises try to iterate and just fall by the wayside. And Civ has iterated enough that it's still relevant. Like, I would say Uncharted 4 is an iteration on the previous Uncharted's as well. I think actually most of the games on this list are iterations, if we're being completely honest. And I think Civ 6's iterations are as good as most of the games on this list. Like, the Uncharted series has always been best in class at presenting good, grounded, realistic narratives and their characters and that kind of stuff. And Uncharted 4 is the next step in that. It's better at that than the other Uncharted games have been, but it's still just the next step in that.
Right.
And that's impressive. And Uncharted 4 also has, like, big weaknesses. Like, I think it has, like, its gameplay is still very thin and kind of mindless. So, like, it has some, like, it does some things really well and some things pretty poorly, or, you know, not really noteworthy. So, like, you know, if you were trying to compare these two games, and I think in that comparison, Civ 6 holds very favorably. I don't know how to compare to some of the other games on this list, but I think Uncharted 4 would go. I would see Uncharted 4 go before Civ.
Okay.
Yeah, and I probably would too. So, you know, if we're trying to cut something, I think we've talked a lot about Uncharted. I don't know that we've really formulated a really strong reason why it should go, but if we just need to cut something,
I mean, my reason why it should go is, I think, like, from a gameplay standpoint, it does not do anything interesting. Like, I totally agree with what you're saying, that, like, it gives you bigger environments and you know, kind of more ways to go about taking down enemies. But at the end of the day, you're still jumping, getting behind cover, shooting guys. Like, you're doing that same basic formula that has kind of defined third-person action games for a decade now. And I don't think it's necessarily going, like, it's doing it better than Uncharted's done it before, but I don't think it's doing it that much better than Uncharted's been doing it for a decade, and I don't think it's doing it better than other games of this style are doing it either. Like, it got to the point where, like, I was kind of tired of just playing the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest criticism you could levy against it, is that a lot of pieces of it are super formulaic. Even the overall plot is the same.
Yeah.
The same Indiana Jones plot that they've been telling for 4 games.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we want to make that argument for it to get cut, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Like, Uncharted 4 to me does one thing well. It is a great example of video game, very presentational storytelling, like movie style storytelling in video games. There are other ways to tell stories in video games, but, like, Uncharted 4 is, like, best in class at movie style storytelling.
Right.
But I think even within that, there is cliched stuff in its story beats, and I think most everything else out of that is, like, standard at best.
All right, let's cut it.
And I think, I mean, the most direct comparison is, I think, Rise of the Tomb Raider was just more fun to play.
Yeah.
For, like, a similar style game.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know which one of those I'd pick, but that's fine. I think we can lose Uncharted for this list.
I don't think it's hanging.
All right.
I will also be willing to promote a trade.
Trade.
Well, and maybe it's a good time to recap the list before we, or would you like to do a couple more first?
Either way.
We made, it looks like 5 cuts. And
Yeah,
We've cut 5. We need to cut 5
maybes.
more.
Yep. So we've cut 5. We've cut Darkest Dungeon, Forza Horizon 3, Overwatch, Tyranny, and Uncharted 4, and we've got Fury, Hyperlight Drifter, and Superhot as candidates for cuts right now.
I can go ahead and tell you guys, you can come at me all you want about Super Hot, but I got Knives Out. And time only moves when I move.
Sounds like it's touche. Well, all right, Flex. Let's hear your proposition. I have a couple questions about games we haven't talked about as well.
My proposed trade was we drop both Fury and Civ 6. Civ 6 is in my top half, but I could see it go. But I also think Fury should go.
I could get behind that. I'd like to take a temperature on 2 or 3 games that we haven't talked about, just to see first before we make those hard cuts, before we make those personal sacrifices for both of us.
Okay.
So a couple games we haven't talked about yet, and I don't know. This is just purely curiosity, maybe a little bit of what I picked up from the previous discussion. So first off, Dark Souls 3. Where does that sit? Like, who wants to put forward some positives on that? I didn't play it. I played Dark Souls and Bloodborne, so I'm definitely familiar with the franchise. But
yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I've played a couple of those, but I haven't played that one.
So I guess I can say a couple of things about Dark Souls. It, like we've already talked about a couple times, it is an iteration in a lot of ways. I think the Dark Souls formula is so impressive and near and dear to my heart that I still absolutely love Dark Souls 3. But if you want to make the iterative argument, this is one you could do that with.
Again, I think you can do that with half the games we have left.
Absolutely.
Bloodborne was on my list last year, and I liked it a lot less than the original. But I'm just curious, like, if this is like.
I think from an execution standpoint, this actually might be the best Dark Souls game.
It is.
Like, I feel like they've refined everything down to a T. Like, even like my favorite one is the first Dark Souls, but a lot of that is tied up with the impact it had.
Right.
And I think there still may be a case that Dark Souls 1's overall world design is as good or better than Dark Souls 3, but I think most every other aspect Dark Souls has ironed out and iterated on to perfection. I think the balance of different character builds you can do, I think the variety in the environments and kind of the pacing of the game is stronger. Like, I think Dark Souls 1, 2, and Bloodborne, I think all 3 of them had a problem where the first half of the game was better than the second half. And I think Dark Souls 3 is the first game in this lineage where every area is equally exciting and it holds firm through from start to finish. Would you agree with that, Nate?
Yeah, definitely. I think this game is the Dark Souls experience that is most refined and well polished, as much as those games get. One thing that I really love about this game that may or may not be silly is the finality of it.
Yes.
Like the whole,
that's where I was going next.
The whole game, the whole setting, the whole atmosphere is about this is the end. And it's not just them saying it's the end of the series, which I think they've said, but
they have said this is the last Dark Souls game. I mean, I'm not gonna believe them.
Yeah, I don't know that I believe
I wouldn't
them
be
either.
surprised if this. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they come back to it because this has been a cash cow for them. But the point is they've designed it to be an ending, and it feels like an ending.
And the weird thing about it is if they make a Dark Souls 4, I think it makes me like Dark Souls 3 less.
Well, and I mean,
so one of my and going right along with that is one of my favorite things about Dark Souls 3 is. Like, at first, I thought it sounded kind of cheesy, but, like, because they have a lot of throwbacks and stuff to stuff in previous games. Mostly Dark Souls 1, but also Demon Souls and Bloodborne, probably less of Dark Souls 2. But by the end of the game, I think towards the end, they have some of their most powerful callbacks. And I think when as in that game's closing hours, I really had this strong sense of, like, reflecting among the entire Dark Souls journey, and it kind of had I had a really profound moment near the end of that game, that was kind of basically thinking back over the past 7 years of video games and kind of like tracing the lineage of how important this franchise has been, both for video games and for me personally. And there was a really powerful moment of tying all that back together and kind of closing this loop for this franchise that has been really important in a number of ways. And the way they do those callbacks, I think, is really special. I agree with Nate that if they make a Dark Souls 4, it'll kind of lessen that impact, but we can't speculate on the future. And like what they've made today is a really strong like bow tying for that franchise. And it would have been less impactful if the game itself wasn't so strong, but the way they've tightened all the nuts and bolts of its mechanics and its design and everything, like I think it works. Like this game feels like the Dark Souls. Like this is them like putting their stake in the ground and saying like this is the best Dark Souls anyone can make, and we are going to ride it off into the sunset on this note. Like we have done our work here, we are done.
Yeah.
And the only other question, because this is kind of what I was getting at, I have is for each of you, Dark Souls 3 or Super Hot?
You gonna do this?
Well, just
I mean, they could both
rhetorical.
Stay.
It's possible, but just purely rhetorical. Like I said, there were 3 games I wanted to get a feel for where they set, because we have to make these cuts, right? So we eventually have to put our stick in the ground and say, okay, if you make me choose between game X and game Y, I'm going to say.
I would pick Dark Souls between those two. I would also pick both of them over half the games that are left.
Yeah, for me, both of those
that stands for
hard.
Right?
Yeah. Both of those are really hard for me to cut. If I have to pick, I'm probably gonna go Super Hot.
I'm not saying you have to pick. I'm just saying I wanted to get a feel for where it sits, because that makes a case that maybe if we have those last 2, that maybe Super Hot should be the one that gets cut. Maybe.
Hey,
I'm saying I would keep Super Hot over.
Yeah, maybe. So the other 2 games I wanted to ask about, and we can, again, this is just getting a feel for where these sit for you guys, because this game I don't know anything about. How do you feel about Inside, Nate?
I feel pretty strongly about Inside 2, but I feel like I'm saying that a lot.
Wait, Inside 2's out?
Yeah, Inside 2, it's great.
Is there any game you consider at the bottom of your list?
I mean, yes, Uncharted 4. Uncharted 4 was one of them, so we cut that.
I'm seeing one.
But yeah.
Let's go Firewatch.
Okay.
So Firewatch and Inside are both interesting ones for me, as I really like both of them, and they were both some of the last cuts I made for my top 10, so they're like barely off.
Right.
But they are both really good at creating like strong atmospheric ways that tell very different kinds of stories, but do wrap you up in their worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not opposed to keeping any of these games, but if we have to make cuts, and we talk about even if we give up Fury and Civ 6, right? That leaves 4 other games for us to cut. So we got to figure out what's the weakest link.
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing here, as I'm looking at this and hearing what we're saying, is that we have a handful of more than a handful of games that are at the bottom or just off of somebody's list and on somebody else's list, somewhere in the middle probably. And those are hard trades to make, because everybody kind of likes them, and at least one person likes it a good bit. And so yeah, I don't know exactly where to poke at for this.
And it helps to just talk about like. I feel like a couple more games that don't seem like they're as strongly situated, and then we can.
So I feel like I keep saying I feel strongly about a game. I feel strongly about a game. One game that I would definitely cut from this list that I probably am going to get strong resistance on is Fire Emblem Fates.
Yeah, you'll get strong resistance on that.
Okay, just double checking.
I could drop Fire Emblem Fates if Fury went with it and we kept Civ 6.
You're just trying to make deals all the time.
No.
I like Fates a lot.
So
I think Fates has substantial problems, but I think what it does really well, it does really well, and the stuff it does really well is the gameplay.
Right.
Anyway, just to get a feel, so you said Inside. Inside was sort of...
Inside and Firewatch are both things that I'm going to fight for. I mean, I know I'm going to lose some battles that I fight for, but if you want me to fight for them, I'll fight for them.
Well, I mean,
Which of those would you fight for more?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of the crux of the issue here.
Okay.
'Cause I know which of those two I like better.
I mean, because
Yeah,
we've got a lot of starred items, right? And we're probably going to have to cut, like, for me and for you, Fury, like,
Sure.
maybe Hyperlight Drifter, maybe Civ 6. Like, so we're going to have to make some tough choices for all of us. So which of these games that you feel really strongly about,
Right.
you feel less really strongly about?
Right. So, Firewatch and Inside aren't a big difference for me at all. I like both of those games for kind of similar reasons, but they're also completely different games. If I had to pick, I would probably pick Inside, but it might come down to whichever one I have more allies on. That said, we have Fury and Hyperlight Drifter starred, and I would cut both of those before either of Firewatch or Inside.
I would back Firewatch and Inside over Fury any day of the week.
I mean, you've already made that point.
Yeah, we know
That's
that.
obviously clear.
That's redundant.
Well, I feel like we're getting to the point where like I think Fury's just not going to make it.
So
Probably
let me
not.
let
But
me
like
propose.
I said, I'd like to get a feel for where some of these other games that we're going to have to make some cuts on.
Let me propose
Is
something
it-
that might be a slightly easier discussion in the sake of of us getting this moving here. Is that I think I'm probably the only one who's going to fight for Hitman.
Okay.
all
I
right.
haven't played enough of it to really like it, but man, that game looks cool.
It's really cool,
Like what I've played is neat.
but the fact that Justin's only played a little bit of it, and it's not one I'm going to like really fight for. If it comes down to that, then I might be willing to let that go. It is a really cool game.
I mean, that would definitely, like, if you want to keep Inside and Firewatch and Dark
I would
Souls,
rather cut that than Firewatch or Inside.
Okay. I could see it going then.
All right.
I mean, we talked a little bit about it. Is there anything
So,
you'd like
yeah.
to read it its last rights?
Yeah, I should say why that game is cool, which is that there is an insane amount of there's an insane amount of interweaving stuff happening on every map in that game, and there are 6 maps in the first season, which is what they've released so far. And each map is like a little world full of NPCs and little storylines and items to find and secret routes to explore and things to push and mess with and see what breaks, basically. It is the sandbox model, but done on a small scale multiple times in very different ways. So instead of one giant sandbox, you get 6 small, very focused and polished sandboxes. And I think it's really, really cool how it drops you into these worlds. It says, here's your objective, kill these 2 people. And how you do that and what you find in that map and what storylines you choose to engage with is 100% on you. But no matter what you do, something hilarious is going to happen.
Yeah. They have made these amazing like clockwork contraptions where the NPCs are walking around and doing things, and like they've placed so many just hilarious, interesting things for you to engage with, and like there's just like this is one of those games where like you kind of get dropped in and you're like, well, what do I do? And then you start poking things, and every single thing you poke is hilarious.
And every single thing you poke is not an end; it's like an opening to do something else.
Beginning.
Yeah, it's like that game never tells you, okay, you saw that, now move on. It's like, oh, you saw that, now what can you do with it?
Yeah. Everything you find, your mind just starts racing with possibilities. Like I know some people witnessed this moment. I was walking around this villa, and like near the beginning of my map, while I was still just getting my feet wet, I found what was labeled as an explosive golf ball. I picked up the explosive golf ball, put it in my pocket, and your mind immediately says, what can I do with an explosive golf ball?
All kinds of things.
All kinds of things. And I did the obvious thing, which was one of my targets likes to play golf, so I snuck the explosive golf ball in his bag of golf balls, and then when he went to hit it, he go kaboom.
That was fun to watch.
Target. Yeah, and like that's kind of the tip of the iceberg of like just the ridiculous shenanigans you can get into with that game. At least from what I've seen.
Yeah.
And like there's so many just hilarious touches. I love when you start the missions and your dude, because like Agent 47 is like just this stone cold murderer. Like he has like no personality to him at all. He is just like, I am a hitman. That is what I am.
Dude's got a barcode on the back of his bald head.
Yeah. And you like load into these levels and he's just doing something totally innocuous and like you're not expecting it. It'll just like load in and you're like in some fancy like country club attire sitting on a bench reading a newspaper, and you just zoom in and then you're just like, well, all right, now I'm going to get up and put this paper down and go kill someone. And it's just like these little like goofy touches. And then like the like ancillary dialogue you hear from the NPCs walking around is some of the best like just side off the cuff dialogue I've ever heard in a video game. Great. It is some magical.
Yeah, at the first map is like a fashion show, and so there's like a big stage with people, going out on it in these different fashions and a huge crowd. And one of the things you can do in that level is climb all the way to the top of this building, and there's like an attic you can climb through, and there are a bunch of guards up there. And the reason you might go up there is for a couple of things. One, it gets you access to the top floor, which is under heavy security, and two is you can drop big parts of the rigging down onto the stage to assassinate one of your targets. But that's not even what I wanted to say right here, is that I was climbing around in this attic looking for an opportunity to get to one of my targets, and there are these two guards in like full I'm a well-paid mercenary tuxedo attire sitting around with assault rifles in this attic, and they start talking about what's the Murphy's Law? Is that what it is? Anything that can't go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that's it. But anyway, they start talking about Murphy's Law and have this like 2-minute discussion about like the nature of the universe and how if Murphy's Law was true, the universe would not exist. And there's like these two random mercenary thugs in an attic having this weird conversation, and it just cracked me up. That game is hilarious.
Yeah, that game is full of just so much personality. It's great. Like you can tell the developers had a lot of fun with it. Like that's a game that's just takes fun liberties with every single aspect of its design.
Yeah.
And it's dead.
And we're gonna cut it, but it's a great game.
I actually would have. It's not on my top 10 because I haven't played enough of it yet. But I actually would have been willing to go to bat for it until you said that you like both Inside and Firewatch better.
Yeah.
So then something's got to go. But man, Hitman's a really, really fun game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're closing in. It looks like we only have 4 more cuts, and we definitely have a couple candidates. Which I did want to ask about one more game, and then maybe we can make some of these tough cuts. These 3 or so that we have on the table. So where does The Witness sit?
Witness ain't going nowhere.
Okay.
Does anyone else have a strong opinion on The Witness other than Fowler?
I mean, I definitely like it a lot.
Okay. Ryan, did you play it?
I did.
Okay. So
Witness is one of the 3 or 4 things on this list I'm going to be a stick in the mud about.
Okay.
So we've got...
I was curious.
We have 1 stick in the mud, 1 liked it, and Ryan will only admit to playing it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun.
Okay.
Okay.
What about Titanfall 2? We haven't really talked about that at all. I know it's a good game. It is a good multiplayer game. It is a fun game, and we were surprised by several pieces of it.
Yeah,
but
Titanfall 2 needs to stay.
Okay.
Okay.
I am very indifferent about Titanfall 2. I could see it go. I like it a lot, but I could see it go.
I could see it go too, but there are, I think we probably all have this at this point, but there are other things I would cut first.
Yeah.
I think at this the games we would all cut first would probably...
Yeah, we should go ahead and talk about those. I mean, we talked about, cutting Fury. Like I said, I'm not happy about it, but if we see a couple other games cut, I think I'll be willing to give that one up.
Okay. So do we want to cut Fury?
there was some discussion about possibly also doing Civ 6, Hyper Light Drifter, Super Hot.
I don't see Super Hot going anywhere. I think it's much more likely for.
How
I'm
strong
able
do you
to-
feel about Civ 6, Nate?
Able to see Fury cut if we
I didn't
see
get a
some
sense of
other
that earlier.
games cut that aren't.
So, Civ 6 is one that I would probably like to stay on here.
I do feel very strong about Civ 6 for me personally, but I don't know what your level of support was.
I'm trying to think, like, for this group of 4, I don't know for sure that it'll be in the top 10. It is for me. I would say I think it should be on our top 10, but if people don't think that it's worthy of that, then we can have that discussion. I would put, okay, so here's my thing, I mean, based on all the games we're talking about. I would put Fury, Hyper Light Drifter, and Titanfall 2 all below Civ 6, or any of those takers.
I would also put all 3 of those below Civ 6.
Would not do that for Titanfall 2, but I haven't played Civ 6.
Okay. So what about
I mean,
Fury and Hyper Light Drifter?
I was going to say, it sounds like if nothing else,
Fury's got to go, man.
Talk about Hyper Light Drifter. Well, hang on. So what I said was Fury can go, but you guys need to make some cuts from your own list.
Yeah, and that's fair.
And I think at least one of Firewatch or Inside needs to go. I don't think both of those can hang.
Okay.
That's another thing that I
mean, I would cut Civ before those.
I feel like Nate's had like 7 top half games at this point.
That's what I'm kind of seeing
I'm not
here.
saying-
So
Inside,
Nate's
I feel
holding
really
on to
strongly
Dark
about
Souls.
this game. Dark Souls, I feel really strongly about this game. Which game do you feel
Whoa,
less?
Hyper Light Drifter, we are not undo that.
Hyper Light Drifter is the only game that we all just went around and said will be fine to cut.
No, nobody said that. We said it was below other games, but the way the overlap works,
I think Fury
like
is
Hyper
more
Light
of a
Drifter is the better
consensus
consensus pick.
I think Fury is more of a consensus to cut than Hyper Light Drifter is at this point.
Nobody said cut Hyper Light.
Maybe not.
Again, if Fury has to go, I mean, Fury is a top half game for me. If it has to
Right.
go, I want to see,
Sure.
I want to see not half my list get cut and nobody else's list get cut.
All right, so let's cut Fury and Civ 6. That's what you said earlier, right?
And Inside.
2, 3.
I think that's probably reasonable, right? We each have to take a hit there.
I mean, Civ 6 is pretty high for me too.
Yeah, I mean, Civ
Civ
6,
6
Civ 6 is both. Here's what I think. I think Civ 6 is actually a bigger loss than Fury because both me and Nate have Civ 6 very high. Ryan has Fury high and Nate has it low.
It depends on what you're...
Well, and I've lost half my games by now.
Civ 6 is not in my top half if we're talking top 10 lists.
Okay. I'm fine with Civ 6.
Now
6
we're
going,
at
but-
1, 2, 3, 4.
But I'm fine with Civ 6 going and Fury going.
I mean, we didn't talk out Inside.
Yeah,
so I don't know if I'd mark it out.
I don't want to mark off Inside.
Paul's getting hasty with his slashing.
I mean,
We could
I don't know.
that move. I think that's a reasonable way for us to all give something.
There's not a
Down to
lot.
one last game.
So can I see if there's something else of mine that we could cut instead of Inside?
I mean, I also
What else?
don't know that I necessarily like this. Like, oh, if one person, it's like, here's the thing that bugs me. Like, I don't think it's the best way to go to be like, oh, if this game that I like's going, then one of yours that you like has to go either. Like, I mean, that almost gets back to the scientific, like, oh, everyone is picking their top 3 and that's our list. Like, I don't like that.
So, I mean, what's the alternative? You guys just want to take all my games off the list? Because that's kind of what I'm.
taking all your
That's
games
kind of
off,
what I'm
Ryan.
hearing
Stop
here,
it.
right? Like I said, I'll give up these 4. I'll even give up number 5, but I'd like to see you guys also give up 1 or 2 games. I don't think that's a little bit of negotiation. That's not like, hey, we're weighing this out scientifically.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think anyone's lost any more than anyone else at this point. And you don't have to try and quantify that, but like just looking at this list, we've all lost stuff. Like this is not, and I don't think it necessarily has to be balanced either. Is what I'm saying.
Make this
Like,
last cut, right? If we make this last cut, it gets a little more even.
Point being, I think trying to make this a scientific balance is not the way to go about it.
Oh.
I think just arguing the merits of each game is how we're going to get there.
So
I mean, I personally do think Inside can come off. Like, Paul kind of cut it before we said that, but for me, like, I really like the atmosphere and everything in that game, but and I'm someone who likes puzzle platformers. I didn't get into any of its puzzles at all. Like, I think it's very simple, straightforward puzzles.
I was gonna say,
and like,
Inside, if you're gonna make what I think is a valid argument about some of the stuff with Uncharted and gameplay, a lot of those arguments apply to Inside as well, because Inside is telling a story. And it's doing a good job, but if you want to look at gameplay, it is very simple. The puzzles are barely puzzles. So I think that, you know, that's one of those games that it does a good job doing what it does, but it doesn't have enough gameplay for me to say it would be in the top 10 for the entire year. And if that's not consensus, then that's fine. But I just think that a lot of the arguments that you made for Uncharted could also apply to Inside as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I go with Inside as well. And I actually enjoy playing Inside less than even Uncharted. I enjoy the atmosphere stuff in Inside a whole lot, though, and I think Inside is one of the few games that, like, you can tell there's a level of craft there that went into every single moment. And like, it's one of those games that's like really hard to poke holes at, other than to say, like, I just think the puzzles are kind of bland.
Yeah.
That said, if I'm playing a puzzle platformer and I think all the puzzles are bland, like, I think that's a fairly big detractor. But I think the stuff it does well, it does really well.
Yeah, I mean, mechanically, nothing it does is super interesting. I absolutely will concede that. I think most of its puzzles and interactions you have with the game do something to flesh out that game's feel and atmosphere. I think like Inside is like a visual short story perfected to a degree that is super impressive. If everybody else thinks that is the next thing that needs to come off, then, you know, that's a hard cut for me, but we can do it.
I don't think it hangs as a whole package. Like, I think the things it does amazingly impressive.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and to be fair, Inside has the moment of the year.
Yes, absolutely. The
that
finale of that
is
game
amazing.
is so crazy awesome.
Yeah, but unfortunately, a moment does not a game make.
Yeah. All right, so what are we working with here?
So we've cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. We have one more game to cut, and
so what have we not talked about?
The only thing that I think we haven't talked about is probably the only game on this entire list that I'm going to be a stickler for, which is Stardew.
Right.
I think that one's definitely in the top 10.
There are others we haven't talked about.
I haven't talked about today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So, but I mean, like, for the rest of the games on the list, I think it's now just getting down to, like, roll a d10.
I would have Stardew Valley would have actually been one of my early cuts, but I also recognize that that's like the game you played in 2016, and you played it a crap ton. And I think that earns it an honorary number 10 spot. But I think if we're getting real here and like arguing the merits of like what are the top games of the year, I think you'd be fending off a whole lot of attacks, Paul.
I think I would too, just because
that,
no one really
honestly.
played it though. Like,
I mean,
I played it.
Well, there are
game,
reasons I haven't played it.
From what I've seen of that game, like, you know, that game has a lot of love, and I don't think it's purely like a cult. You know, like I said, I played the old Harvest Moon games, and like I really like those games, and the fact that somebody has revived that, I could see that being in contention to be on a top 10 list. And I'm guessing this game is on a lot of people's like for ones or top 10s.
I
mean, this is a game that the people who like it really like it, and that's where you see that love. It's like this is a game that you either play it and you like it and you love it and it's your favorite game ever, or you play it, you try it and bounce off of it and just don't care. That everyone I've heard talk about this game is in one of those two buckets.
I mean, Steam did just release what their best-selling games of the year was, and Stardew Valley was on there. I'm just saying.
Well, the internet likes it, but we are not the internet.
Yeah, I mean,
Bullshit.
I'm not in favor
Bullshit.
of pushing this one off because
No,
I think-
I'm good with keeping Stardew.
yeah, I think
I will fight it getting high on the list, though.
Yeah, it's fine if it ends up on there, but I'm not gonna let it get too high up on the list because I actually did try to play it and did not enjoy it.
We haven't talked about Tokyo Mirage, but I know that's a Ryan passion piece. I think of what we have left. I think Dark Souls. I feel like Dark Souls 3 stays. I think Doom stays. I think Tokyo Mirage, like I just said, and The Witness. I think those ones stay. I think most, and then Stardew will keep. But I think most anything else could go for this last spot.
for me, XCOM want to see stay, and Conquest I want to see stay. In addition to what you said.
So what if we had everybody nominate one or two things that you would cut for the last cut, and see if we line up on anything?
Is anything on the table, or?
I mean, sure.
Hey,
If you know that it's not
it
going
might
to fly,
be
then you might.
counterproductive. Yeah, if you just throw something big out.
All right, can I go ahead and do something here?
What's that?
And you tell me at each step if you guys agree. I think Dark Souls 3 is on this list.
I agree.
agree with that.
I think Doom is on this list.
Yes.
Yep.
I think Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE is on this list.
Like to see that stay.
Works with me.
I think The Witness is on this list.
Sure.
All right, the reason I did that is if we're going to do this, what one or two would you like to see? They cannot be one of those four that you say. How does that sound?
Okay.
Because I feel like those four. Oh, and I was also going to do that for Stardew because we just talked about it.
Well,
so those five are kind of protected. Does that make sense? Because
yeah,
when you
I
said
get
the
what
cut
you're
thing,
saying,
because
yeah.
like when you because I would have said Stardew, but because we just
yeah, it would be
that would be counterproductive.
counterproductive to pick somebody's
right.
top two games and
All
attack
right.
that because those aren't going to get cut off.
All right. So do we want to just say which one, or do you want to do one or two each, or?
I mean, I'm happy to reiterate a couple that we talked about. I mean, Hyper Light Drifter was one of mine, but it's pretty low on my list. So if it went, in favor of the fact that everybody else seems to like other games better,
Right.
that's okay with me. And then Super Hot is a game I played, and I won't say I disliked it, but like we talked about with most disappointing, I think it's just too thin on content. Really be a strong contender for this list. So if it's on, that's great, but I don't think I think those two are the weakest links as I see them.
Okay.
Anyone else want to throw some things out?
Well, I know which one Nate would cut.
I have three options, but I'm trying to narrow it down in my mind. So somebody else go.
I still feel that the discussions that we had around XCOM make that the weakest game on the list left. If not that, then all the discussions that we've had today around Hyper Light Drifter, those two.
We actually haven't discussed Hyper Light at all today.
It's had a star for a while.
I don't know why, but it has.
I mean, we
Yeah,
haven't.
right.
We haven't
I mean, correct me if
discussed it on
if I like
the game.
fell asleep for a little bit, but I don't remember actually talking about it.
Game itself. We talked about it in previous days as well. I mean, we can go over again. If you want to put out your defense, I guess, or if you want to, maybe you
I
should
would
wait.
keep it over
Maybe you should
other-
wait
like, I
to
would-
see if it actually is going to get cut before you throw out the defense for it.
Okay. mean, I don't have a strong preference on what's left. Of what's left, my favorites are Fire Emblem and Hyperlight.
So I mean, Fire Emblem is a top 2 for me, even more so than Tokyo Mirage. So I would be in favor of keeping that one on the list.
Okay.
I feel like Super Hot and Fire Emblem should both stay on the list because I feel like they're a situation where 2 people like it and 1 doesn't. And it's hard for me to imagine picking one of them to go over the other.
Yeah, I think those both should stay.
I think we drop either Firewatch, Titanfall, or XCOM. Or Hyperlight, I guess.
Yeah. My 2, I think, would be Hyperlight or Titanfall.
I like Titanfall and XCOM both a lot.
Okay. So maybe Hyperlight is the consensus cut.
Or Firewatch. I would see that go over Hyperlight. I really like playing Hyperlight.
I mean, I did too, but I would definitely not keep that over Firewatch.
I feel like it's one of those 2 that goes. I have a strong preference for Hyperlight going. If you have a strong preference for Firewatch going, then maybe we'll just have to flip a coin.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a stronger preference for Firewatch staying.
I'll leave it up to you. We can drop Hyperlight.
So the thing that I will say about Hyperlight, I think that game is really cool. I like its style a lot. I think it has cool action combat. I think that all the controls and weapons and abilities you use are super fun and responsive. I didn't, for some reason, get super into like that game past the like intro. Like I really liked it at the start, and when I first like chose a path and went a direction and explored and found some stuff, like I really enjoyed it for that first little bit, and then like for some reason getting through that first area and beating the first boss that I went to, from then on the rest of the game just kind of felt like doing the same thing, like didn't really grab me past that point, and it was just kind of like a slow downhill until the end. And then the other thing that game did that annoyed me, which may not be fair, is I always wanted to find stuff in the environment, but it was like weirdly tedious to do so.
That is my one complaint about the game, is the way they hide a lot of the upgrades and stuff is a little obnoxious.
Which is like that stuff's all optional, so I don't want to hold that against it too much. But it did get on my nerves fairly often.
Right. I mean, yeah, I got to a point in that game where I was literally just bumping up against every wall because it was just literally hidden pathways and walls.
And I did that for a little bit, and then I got to the point in the game where I stopped looking around the environment for anything because that was so annoying. And so that sort of contributed to me throughout the second half of that game, especially just kind of like going straight to the boss and beating it, and then coming back to town, and then going straight to the next boss and beating it, and going back to town, and it just felt a little rote to me at that point. Right. But I think the game plays super well. It's super responsive, has a great look, great sounds. You know, like there's a lot of cool stuff in that game. I just didn't get into the act of playing it throughout the entirety of it.
Like that, this game for me is like one of. It's not a necessarily long game, and it's not really a deep game either, but it's one of those games that like everything about its design comes together and forms this cohesive whole that just really clicked. Like I actually really like the combat. It's very straightforward, but they vary the environments and the enemies enough that the moves that you have available to you in combat, like there's a lot of different ways to make use of them, and I think the aesthetic of that game is perhaps my favorite aesthetic of anything I played this year. Like I think the art of that game is gorgeous. I think the sound design and the sound effects play into that very well. Like it's a lot of the music's very ambient, but it works to like add to that art. And I think when we're talking about like the noises of combat and the enemies, like that stuff feeds in so well. Like this is one of those games, like people like to talk about stuff like inside of everything like forming this whole, but like then I don't care about the puzzles. Like Hyper Light Drifter, I like its style and look at least as much as inside, and then I think it's also fun to play. Like I think that combat is really snappy and responsive and satisfying. And I really liked fighting those enemies and exploring that world. Like it's a very explorative game. Like it's kind of a throwback to, you know, the games from the 16-bit era days where you kind of go on this grand mysterious quest, and it emulates that incredibly well. Like it's introducing this world that has just a lot of detail and style to it, and it's really fun to just explore that world and see what's around each corner.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that game hits on all marks.
Ryan, you're a Hyper Light Drifter fan too, right?
Yeah. Again, it was definitely on my list, but close to the bottom.
Okay.
So I do agree that it did a pretty good job of recapturing some of that kind of 16-bit top-down action RPG, and it did have I did like some of the dashing way, that kind of like gameplay was really snappy, and they had a little dashing mini game. Past that, I mean, and of course it's a beautiful game. Past that, I mean, it was fun to play. I enjoyed it. I don't think I necessarily fell in love with it. I do like it. I think it's a cool game, but not one of my strongest picks. Like,
right. So you would definitely put Fire Emblem and Tokyo Mirage Sessions on before that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's 100%. What I thought. I just making sure we have this in order. Yeah. So
I would put Hyper Light over everything left in contention except Fire Emblem.
Except Fire Emblem. Okay.
That's not bolded.
Right. Okay.
I could see it go if you feel more strongly about Firewatch, but
I mean, I do, but I think Hyper Light Drifter might be the better consensus pick for this group because it was just off of my list. Like, it's still a game I really enjoy.
Right. I mean, Firewatch, I really like its story, and we gave it best narrative.
Yeah.
That is literally the thing I like about Firewatch. I don't like, otherwise it's just a very straightforward, like,
that's fair,
adventure game. That's where I come down on that one. Like, its story it is my favorite narrative of the year.
Yeah.
And like that counts for something for sure. But like that's kind of the game to me.
Right. And that's what it is for sure. Yeah, that game was really, really cool. I really like Firewatch a lot, but if we're making this a consensus list, then maybe that should be the one that goes. Also,
I will leave that up to you. I've said my piece on both games. I'm ultimately not that upset at which either one makes it because I do really like both.
Right.
So I will leave that up to you. I mean, I think you know where I stand.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think we should cut Firewatch.
All right. So we're gonna get rid of Firewatch, and we have our list. It only took an hour and a half.
Sounds about right.
All right, so I'm gonna go through the games that we have left to order. So starting at the top, we have Dark Souls 3, Doom, Fire Emblem Fates, Conquest, Hyper Light Drifter, Stardew Valley, Super Hot, Titanfall 2, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Sharp FE, The Witness, and XCOM 2. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to put these in order from 10 to 1. And we'll see you on the other side of the break. Right, we are back. We have 10 games now for our Game of the Year that we are going to attempt to order, which is not going to work, but we're going to do it anyway. So...
Oh, it'll work.
No, it won't. That's fine. So just to go ahead and make things easy, we're going to put Stardew Valley at number 10, because that's...
Can you go ahead and read off the list again since we came back from a
Yeah,
break?
I was just going to go ahead and put that one at number 10 and then just read off the other 9. So the 9 games that we will have left to rank are Dark Souls 3, Doom, Fire Emblem Fates Conquest, Hyper Light Drifter, Super Hot, Titanfall 2, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE, XCOM 2, and The Witness.
Move the Doom and the Witness up to the top, and that order's pretty good.
Well,
objection.
So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do what we've done on our other rankings podcasts, and I'm going to make a top tier, a middle tier, and a bottom tier. So
This is good. I have a feeling this isn't going to get us very far.
no,
We'll
it's
see where
not,
this
but
goes.
it's not going to take us very long to go through. So I just want to see what happens. So Dark Souls 3 Flex, is that top, middle, or bottom?
Top.
All right, Nate.
So does top mean top, or is this 3, 3, and
3,
3?
3, and 3. Is
All right.
this top 3?
Yes.
Okay, Nate.
Yes.
Flex. Or Ryan. Sorry.
He hadn't played it.
I haven't played it, but I guess I would be okay with it being in the top 3.
All right, so we're going to put that in the top 3 for now. That doesn't mean it's going to end up there.
Yeah.
No,
Nothing's set in stone yet.
Nope. All right, so
Nothing's set in stone until this recording ends.
right, so Doom, Flex.
Do you have to ask?
I just for the record. All right.
Top of the top.
Yeah. Nate
Yes.
and Ryan.
I have some issues with Doom as a franchise, so I'm gonna probably have to. I mean, I wouldn't even put it on this list, but I haven't played this particular game, so I can't. I'll have some arguments, I guess, when we discuss the actual ranking.
Well,
Okay.
I would
If
also
everyone else is putting it in the top tier, just stick it there for now.
Yeah, I would also put this in the top tier, so that's 3 for top. Fire Emblem Fates Conquest, Flex.
Middle.
Nate,
Bottom.
Ryan.
Nate would be off this list.
Top. So top, middle, bottom. I'm going to sort it into the middle, and then we'll just see where it goes from there.
All right.
Hyper Light Drifter, Flex.
Of what's left, middle.
All right. Nate.
Hold on. Give me a sec. Bottom.
Ryan.
Bottom.
I think that one's going to wind up in the
Yeah,
bottom.
I mean-
Put it there.
That's a middle and a couple bottoms, so we're gonna put that in the bottom tier. Super Hot. This should be fun.
Yeah. This
Flex.
is gonna be a good one.
Bottom.
Nate.
Top.
Ryan.
Bottom.
2 bottoms and a top means a bottom. All right. Titanfall 2, Flex.
Bottom.
Nate.
Bottom.
Actually, no, middle.
Middle. Okay, so middle. Nate.
Bottom.
Middle. Excellent.
Bottom.
Nate.
Oh my gosh. Bottom.
Bottom.
Ryan.
I'm bottom again.
Top.
Top. So we got 2 bottoms and a top.
That's what Super Hot was.
That's what Super Hot was. That's right. So now Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE.
Bottom.
Personal top tier, but
All right,
I don't
so
know
we
if
have a
that's
bottom,
gonna
a
work
top.
out.
That's what you should say.
A bottom, a top, and Nate, did you play this one?
I haven't played it, so I.
No, only Ryan played
All
it.
right. Bottom and a top makes the middle, I guess. XCOM.
Well,
2 bottoms and a top.
yeah, it'd be 2 bottoms. And I mean, unless we're just not voting for things we don't play, it'd be 2 bottoms and a top.
Oh,
Yeah, just put it down there for now. We'll figure it out.
sure.
Fair enough.
So XCOM 2, Flex,
Middle.
Nate,
Middle.
Ryan.
Top.
Jesus Christ. Can we get a 3 for any one of these?
No. That is the answer is no.
Yeah, I knew this was gonna happen.
The Witness.
Top.
Middle.
Not on this list.
Top, middle, and bottom.
So,
And
middle.
I guess middle for that.
Put it in the middle. So I think we have 2 strong consensus for top.
So I think we do have a couple of strong consensuses for top, if nothing else. So Doom and Dark Souls 3 should be near the top of this list whenever we're done.
Doesn't necessarily mean they're both top 3, but they should be somewhere in.
Well, I think it may be easier to hit maybe what we think should be at the very bottom and what should be at the very top, and then attack the middle from there.
I think Hyper Light Drifter is number 9. I'm going to throw that out there.
All right.
I would agree with that.
I am not against that.
All right. So
It's in my middle. I would take it over, of what we have left, it'd be my number 4. But I will take this. I will take this sacrifice.
I think Doom should be number 1. I'll go ahead and throw that out there.
Sha.
Yep.
I got some issues with that.
Well, you haven't played it, and you just hate the whole franchise.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's not, I guess if we're gonna go there, and I may not win this, I am happy to put out Voice of Reason.
Well, what would you nominate for number 1 if not Doom with what's on the list right now?
I mean, my personal number 1 is on this list, but this is a consensus exercise, so I don't know if we really want to go there.
Yeah, I don't know if we should go ahead and stick Doom in the number 1 slot. I don't know the best way to do this, but that seems like it's going to be hard for. Well,
I mean,
don't know.
we can continue.
I mean, the
ranking
other way
from
to
the
think about it
bottom
is if Doom isn't number 1, what is?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think.
There's no other clear pick here.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just figure if we establish what would be the top, and then what would be the bottom, then we can say, all right, is this game better than our current number 1? If yes, then it moves up to number 1, and then our number 1 slides down. And the same thing with the bottom, too. That's kind of what I was trying to go for. But
Sure.
if we just want to sort of start from the bottom and then muddy around the middle, and eventually the top sorts itself out, that's the other way that we can do this. But I was just trying to say, here's our baseline for the bottom, here's our baseline for the top. So if you want your game to be, above the top or down at the bottom, then you've at least got a couple of things to go by.
I mean, if you want to have the discussion, that's fine. I'll make a defense why I don't think Doom should be the number 1. I know you guys like it enough that it'll be in the top 3, if not the number 1. But I haven't played Doom for a reason, so
Yeah.
I have some things to say about the franchise and why I wouldn't put that game.
I mean, if we go into that, I have the games I haven't played for reasons too, if we want to go down that road.
Sure, I mean, you said that with Stardew Valley, right? You said you had no interest to play Stardew Valley. In the end, that argument may not hold, but I do have some things to say about it.
All right, well, the floor is yours.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess Doom, so there's been a lot of love in this game from this panel throughout this year. So I did look into it just to see if it's something I'd be interested in. And, I guess I ended up choosing not to play it because I just don't think it's going to be my cup of tea. I've been exposed to Doom as a franchise before, and just the whole setting is the style and design is not something that has ever really appealed to me for the franchise. I watched the intro video, and looked at some of the screenshots and things like that, and watched some of the gameplay. And I think it's great that they've done a cool reboot, and they've taken themselves a lot less seriously. I guess they kind of realized that they were B-rated movie of the video game industry, so they went more Evil Dead and less like Pumpkinhead, kind of tried to be a little more tongue-in-cheek about it. But yeah, it's just from what I can see, it sounds like the game has a really good single-player campaign. I think the consensus from this panel was kind of who cares about the multiplayer? And the setting is still it's still Doom. You still have these goofy demons, cyborg demons, the most ridiculous thing ever. A lot of really ugly, campy designs, very in-your-face setting, and very dark and occultish and heavy-handed on occultism and demonism. So I just don't think it would really be my cup of tea. I haven't pushed back on it too much as it's gotten its other props because I haven't played the game, and I know you guys, a lot of you fell in love with it, but Like when I watch some of the intros, like, the YouTube comments are all talking about like how he's, Doom Guy was like cracking his knuckles and punching monitors and stuff like that. And I saw it and I was like, yeah, that's cute. I mean, it's kind of neat that they're doing something funny like that, but I just don't, it didn't really grab me or like make me that excited about the reboot. Anywho, that's kind of my spiel on some of the issues I have with Doom as a game. I think it's great that they've done a better version of that, but I just don't have quite the glam in my eyes for it to put it as like a best game of 2016.
Some of that stuff you were complaining about sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think it is a personal taste thing, it sounds like, which is fine. That doesn't invalidate your opinion in any way.
I have a laundry list of reasons why I do think this campaign's incredible. I mean, we have talked a lot about, its sound and its look and its narrative and all that other stuff, but I actually think this game's biggest strengths do lie in its gameplay elements, which we haven't even talked about.
Yeah, the gameplay it's weird because the gameplay is like 1997 Unreal Tournament, but with a 2016 polish that I did not know was even possible before I turned this game on and started playing it.
And then on top of that, like actually totally new ideas in a shooter campaign, which is crazy because those things have become so monotonous.
Yeah, and that polish is like apparent in every single facet of its design, from like the level design to the enemy design to the weapon design to even the upgrades and the collectibles you get. This game does collectibles like better than a first-person shooter campaign should. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't seem possible. And there is a lot of smart touches in every aspect of that gameplay design. And I could go on, if it comes down to it, I will get on a big soapbox about why this, from a gameplay standpoint, I honestly think this is the best first-person shooter campaign I have ever played. And then when you take all of that gameplay stuff, and then also the feel, like you compare it to like 97 Quake or whatever, like the feel of this as a first-person shooter is just top-notch. In my mind, is unparalleled. And then on top of that, a lot of times you think about shooters of just being like this fun, frivolous thing, but the design choices it has are smart in a way that other games could learn from. And then on top of that, it sounds great. It looks great. Its narrative is surprisingly effective, as we've talked about before, in a way that I think is more effective than a lot of video game narratives are. And that all comes together to create what I think is one of the best all-around packages a video game can possibly be. Like, it hits at all angles and it nails every angle. Whereas a lot of other games we talk about, it does one thing well and falters in another. Like, Doom is the rare game that you can actually talk about it into every single category because it does literally everything well. And all of the things it tries to do. So on top of that, like, all the things it tries to do are like really smart things, and then it hits them. So it's trying to do a lot and hitting them both, and all of it feels like very intentional and well considered.
Yeah, and
that's my mini spiel. I got more if we need.
Yeah, well, the only other thing that I think that's worth bringing up when you talk about gameplay is there are a lot of games that come out that actually do have good gameplay, but then they don't deliver somewhere else. To me, the primary example of that is a game like Destiny, right? The core of Destiny, which is I got a gun and I'm gonna shoot a dude with it, is really good. The shooting for that game is excellent. And that's why, I got into Destiny was it's like, everything feels really good. All the gameplay feels really good. And then, they did a few other things that were good, but, you start with the gameplay. And the thing that Doom does, which is something that you don't see a whole lot in, modern day shooters, is the game starts you out and you learn pretty much all of the mechanics without a narrator. It does a great job of sort of leading you through how everything works without having, like Captain Price yelling at your ear, and that's something that's harder to hit than I think we give credit for a lot of times, and it does hit that really well in a way it's self-explanatory in a way that's super, super elegant, and that's really cool.
Yeah, that's the reason that intro to Doom is so incredible. Like, it's really subtle in a way, and just watching it may not get it across, but the reason Doom's intro, like 5 to 10 minute intro, is so incredible is you think about how many games take a half an hour, 2 hours, whatever, take a long time to set up both its gameplay mechanics and its universe and its setting and all of that stuff. Like, so many games take so long just to get their foot on the ground. And Doom, within the first 5 minutes, you know what happened here. You know what your goal is. You know how to play every single part of the game. Like, within the first 5 minutes, it teaches you how to shoot, how to switch weapons, how to do glory kills. It introduces you to the basic enemies, and it sets up the universe, what happened, and all of the players, and like, that game gets you from 0 to 60 so fast and so effectively that a lot of games can't even get you to that point in an hour. It is amazingly effective.
But it's also not rushed, and that's kind of the thing that I was trying to, it's like, because there's plenty of games that are just like, haha, mechanics, and then you're like, how does any of this work? I mean, like, for me, that was The Witcher 3. I guess I loaded up that game, and they're like, hey man, you got swords and you got potions, and here's 10 dudes, and I'm like, whoa, you guys got to give me a minute here. But
yeah, like, you don't really know how to play The Witcher until probably like 10 hours in or something.
Yeah, but with
know how to play Doom 5 minutes in.
Which, I mean, yeah, some of that is Doom is a simpler game.
Yeah,
but,
that's what I was going to say. To some extent, and here's it's a mechanically simple game, which is not a knock against it, but
no, that's what I was going to say. Is in my personal opinion, I think it is a bigger strength for games to be mechanically simple and easy to learn, and then Doom becomes interesting and like, what you learn in those first 5 minutes is what you need to know for the entire game, but the game becomes more complex and more difficult as it goes because it varies things like the level design and the enemy design and the weapons you use. It builds out that stuff without forcing you to learn new mechanics. And I think, in my opinion, the best video games take simple mechanics and then flesh them out in really smart ways to keep them interesting from start to finish. And if you think about Doom, like another thing it does really smartly, and this is probably one of the best things it does to keep things fresh, is like, think about the enemies in New Doom. Every single enemy has a different functionality.
Right.
Imp is the fast guy who runs and climbs on walls and shoots projectiles at you. The Pinky is the melee guy who charges you and has armor on his face but is weak in the back. The Summoner summons new enemies. The Hell Knight is your general melee brute who just never stops rushing at you.
He takes a lot of bullets.
He takes a lot of
bullets.
I
just had to fight one of those guys, and the only thing I had was my little shock pistol, and I'm like, nah, man, I ain't got time for this. I got to sign on to ATACS.
Yeah. And then, the Revenant flies and shoots rockets, and the Cacodemon is this giant ball who hovers in the air above you and spits gunk at you. So, like, every single enemy has a different functionality, and you have to go about tackling them a different way. And, like, the game is really clever about adjusting its level design and its, like, composition of enemies in your encounters and, like, these combat rooms or whatever, that, like, every combat feels unique and different. And, like, it's doing all of that without forcing you to learn any new mechanics at all. It's taking these mechanics that are very simple to be introduced to and then just runs with them for miles. It gets so much out of so little, and I think that makes a great video game.
Whew. All right. And I mean, like, I think that the last little bit is even if the game's narrative or its setting or like this, that, or the other is not your cup of tea, like Nate was saying, that's a completely valid opinion.
Yeah.
The gameplay is something that I think that you could take that gameplay and you could copy and paste it onto some other shooter, and it would like, you're starting with a great base there.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if Call of Duty had, like, the variety of the enemies and, like, the broad level design and, like, all of those other things. Like, that would instantly be a substantially better campaign just with that.
Yeah.
And with the narrative stuff, like, whether you like that style or not, I think it's pretty inarguable that they had a vision and they went for it and they nailed it and they made something that, like, that thing has its own identity, and it's hard to imagine them like executing on that identity any better. So like not liking what it does says you don't like the idea. The execution it's there. They did it. Are you muted, Paul?
Yeah, I just noticed that. I was about to say a thing, and then I went, wait, I was going to cough, and then I didn't. So I mean, I think it's, if we don't want to make it number one, then that's fine. I think that Doom is still solidly in the top tier.
I want to make it number one.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to convince me. I think it's number one. I don't know how strongly Ryan feels about it, not from his perspective, but I think there are three of us who would probably put it at number one. I don't know if that makes it automatic.
I get that.
Though.
I mean, I like I said, I didn't think I would win this one, but
right.
I did, what I know about the game, and I made a conscious decision not to play it.
Sure.
And, I can only speak to what I know, so
sure.
It's a skeptical pick for me, but I'm not going to fight.
And we can revisit it if we want to. I mean.
Okay.
Let's move on and try and set some of this other stuff, I think.
Yeah, let's just. I don't really know where you guys want to go next. I mean, Fire Emblem Fates Conquest is a completely different style of game that's down in the middle tier that had some different opinions. I don't know if we want to try and hash there, or if we want to just say the Titanfall 2 is probably a consensus number 8 or number 7 or something like that. I don't really know where you guys want to
go. It might be easier to start with the tiers. Maybe. Either bottom tier, probably start with bottom tier. I don't know.
Yeah, we can do that.
Kind of position those games roughly where we thought they would be.
So I haven't played Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE, so maybe we should just start there in comparison to the other two games in our bottom tier, Titanfall 2 and Superhot.
Yeah, I'm the only one who's played that, so I guess we'll see how that lands. But I would put it. I would move Titanfall up higher on this list. Of course, I would move them both up higher on this list, but I would put it in the games we have here. I would put it below Titanfall and above Superhot. Yeah, I mean, it's a game that only I played. I think I mostly talked about it, or I talked about it somewhat the other day in terms of music. Didn't get to moments, but the thing I like about Tokyo Mirage Sessions is I liked a lot of the things about it. Like it's where do we start here? The best thing about it, I feel like, is you have this narrative and this setting where you're basically like saving the world using the power of Japanese popular culture. It's kind of a ridiculous setting, and it's really silly, but it ends up being like a pretty fun, like anime-ish romp through this JRPG. And to me, like that kind of setting and narrative that it did was the best part by far. Like that game, like was a game I constantly laughed along with because it has a great sense of humor. And the gameplay, the combat is pretty fun. I played it, I think, for 70 hours, and it started to wear probably after the first 40-ish hours. So, I mean, it's got that kind of RPG challenge in which any combat system has to hold up for a pretty long time. But in terms of the dialogue and the characters, like I thought that was fun and funny. And it has like a bright, like anime-ish setting. Like the story is serviceable. Like the graphics are pretty decent. Like it has a nice, like anime-ish look. The music, as we talked about, like is pretty catchy. Like it's pretty good sound-wise, and they interweave it in with the combat system or the battle system. But yeah, I know it might not make it too high on this list since I'm the only one who played it, and it partly is, I think, how much you enjoy that game is going to depend on how much like the humor and the style grabs you. Like if you don't like if you don't like anime, you don't think some of the jokes fell flat for you, like you probably would not like that game. But if they did a really great job with writing and with localization, and like for an RPG, I thought it was a lot of fun.
I like the anime.
So yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, Paul. I think you mean anime.
No, I like the anime because I live in the United States, and that's how we say the word anime.
so for my money, I mean, I'm okay with it because I'm the only one who played it with it being in the bottom tier. I would personally probably prefer it over Super Hot, but I don't know if that's a hard sell. But yeah, I mean, gameplay wise, like it had, it had a pretty fun RPG system. The thing that was unique about it, Flex and I compared notes because I haven't played any of the Persona games, but he mentioned that when you hit an enemy with a type that they're weak to, that that triggers the Persona games. That kind of gives you a big advantage. It like knocks them down or something.
Yeah.
In Fire Emblem Fates, in Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I made the Fire Emblem crossover there. There's a similar effect, and they use some of the Fire Emblem strengths and weaknesses. So like swords are usually weak against lances, strong against axes, and they have that triangle, and then they have like a magic triangle, which is probably closer to the Persona games. But when you hit an enemy with an ability that they're weak to, like if I hit an axe enemy with a sword attack, my party can join in and do what's called a session. And I mean, it's mostly automatic, so you don't do any interaction at this point. But it basically gives all of your party members a chance to throw in like a free attack. So it's kind of a neat mechanic. Like it's fun to watch because I'll hit this enemy with a sword attack, and then like somebody will jump in and hit them with a lance attack, and then somebody might come in and like shoot them with a fire spell, and they have it. It's like a very flashy thing, like fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I obviously haven't played this game, and if I'm being 100% honest, like half of the games left on this list, I don't really care about their ordering. My one, like, I guess big hesitation with Tokyo Mirage is from everything I've seen about it, it seems very much in the same, not in the same, but in a similar mold as the Persona, and maybe even to some degree the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games. But I get from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like it does some of those things quite as well. So it ends up in this case where it's like kind of more the same, but maybe not the best. Whereas a lot of the games on this list we've kind of chided for being more of the same, even when they're better. So I'm not sure that this one even reaches that bucket, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my one hesitation with this game in particular. But I mean, and that's not to say that I don't think what it does is bad. I think it looks like a cool game, and if I had a lot of time, I would play it. But from the admittedly small amount of it I've seen, I'm not sure that it's really doing anything that we haven't seen done elsewhere, or that it's necessarily doing it better either.
So, do we think it's going to end up ranking? I mean, let's just compare it directly to Titanfall. I think that's probably what Ryan was saying, that should it be a right in front of or right behind Titanfall 2? Not saying.
I think even Ryan had Titanfall 2 above.
Yeah, I don't think that's the question. I think maybe.
Yeah, that's not a question.
I think maybe the discussion we're going to have is about Super Hot.
Yeah, I mean, we can put Tokyo Mirage Sessions at number 8. I do think like how much you enjoy that game is going to be like how much you like the characters and sense of humor. Combat system was pretty good. I don't know that it's like revolutionary from a JRPG perspective, and it does wear out after 30, 40 hours, which you could probably beat that game in about 50 hours if you mostly mainlined it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that feels like the right place for it for me, based on what I know about it and how you've described it. But I don't want to shoehorn it because we haven't played it. So I want you to make that call, Ryan.
I mean, I'm okay with that, but
okay.
Let's move on to the next order of business.
And just to double check, would you put that a spot above Hyperlight Drifter? Does that seem correct?
For my list, it was well above Hyperlight Drifter.
I have a feeling on Ryan's list, Titanfall 2 is number 1 and Tokyo Mirage is number 2.
Okay.
quite, but it's not
He
too
hasn't.
far off.
I don't have any official knowledge on that. That's purely my guess.
Okay.
So maybe we should just go ahead and have the super hot discussion. I mean, I've seen a lot about that game. I haven't played it, but I feel like I've watched the entirety of it. I'm pretty sure that I've heard enough people talk about it to where it's like, yeah, this is really cool, you know. But I am like the biggest concern that I have that would keep it somewhere down on this list for me is it is so short. So what you're going to have to convince me of is that even though the game is short, you're still getting a full experience and not just a tech demo, because that's kind of what I worry about with what I've read and what I've seen. So that's the challenge you're having to overcome with me.
Right. Yeah.
I will say, Nate, I think you're on your own on this one because I would put it at number 7.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna try and get it as high as I can, but it's gonna end up wherever it ends up.
Sure.
So super hot. I totally understand the criticism that some people might have about the price to amount of content ratio, and that's a very like individual thing. Like,
Yeah. That's always a conversation that I don't like. I understand why that's a problem, but I also don't think it factors into the merits of the game itself.
But 2 hours does. I mean, like, if this is a 10-hour game, I'm not even bringing this up, because I do agree that the game should be able to stand on its own regardless of sort of the amount of playtime. Like, a 100-hour JRPG is not better than a 30-hour first-person shooter, you know? But with only 2 hours, that's getting down into the tech demo spot for me. That's
right.
That's the only reason why I bring it up specifically for Super Hot, is because it's so short that now it's like I normally don't go to this argument, but now I want to make sure you're actually getting a full gameplay experience with such a short amount of time with the game.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a rare case for me. The reason I bring up the price is just because, you know, I'm not the most price sensitive guy, especially when it comes to games, but at the same time, like, I do, you know, there is a market out there, right? And like, the developers of Super Hot launched this game, which, as we've talked about, it has so little main content, and they kind of stuck it at a stubborn price point of, you know, $25 at launch, and they've never really let it go on sale for less than 15. And, you know, you think about all the great indie games and, like, you know, all the great games out there that you can get an incredible experience out of for like much less than $15. It just you know, after so many months after they release, it really struck me as, like, you know, even if we took the price point out of it, like, I do think the lack of content is a big stick for this game. And there were some things I didn't like about it. I mean, yeah, it's a cool concept, but, like, you know, there's just not that much of it.
Right. So yeah, I mean, we can talk about price or not. I don't know if that's
an aside. So let's table the price.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the price argument.
Let's talk about lack of content. Let's talk about, like,
I do think lack of content.
You know, I think their little setting is clever, but it's not that exciting. Like, I didn't like the setting that much. As I mentioned, I thought the graphics were kind of functional, but not really that great.
But it's got style.
It does have a lot of style. I love the way that the enemies, like, shatter apart when you kill them. I think that's a really cool effect. I like the way that game looks. That could just be a personal difference. I think that the stark backgrounds and the red highlighted enemies and bullets are really effective, and it makes sense within what that game is, which is sort of like a pseudo VR game is the setting of what you're doing. So in terms of the merits of what that game is, I think even though it is short, it does a lot of really cool things, and that is why I like it so much. You know, we talked about how Doom starts off and you know exactly what you're doing within the first 5 or 10 minutes. With Super Hot, you know exactly what's going on the first screen. Like, that game launches and you're going and you know what's happening.
Super Hot has one of my favorite video game tutorials ever. The first thing it displays on screen is time moves only when you move, and that's literally all you need to know about to play the game.
Yeah, and it starts you off
and
with
it just conveys that immediately.
And I think it starts you off with a screen where like an enemy is dying right in front of you, and their gun is flying up in the air, and there's another guy behind him, and so you can like immediately look around, see that it says time only moves when you move. You can see that nothing's happening.
Right.
Then you start to look around. You see things start to slowly move as you look around. You grab that gun out of the air, point it at the enemy, shoot. You see time jolt forward, and then you kill that first enemy, and then you're like, okay, I got it. The whole game is unveiled to me now.
I like, as I said with Doom, I like games that are. I actually really like games that have simple mechanics and then do cool stuff with that mechanics. The difference between, say, Doom and Superhot is I think Doom gets way more out of its mechanics than Superhot does. I think Superhot's mechanic is really cool and they introduce it in a really great way, but I think Doom with its enemy variety and level design is able to get a whole lot, and its upgrades is able to get a whole lot more out of its mechanics than Superhot is.
Probably more, yeah. I wouldn't argue with that. It's a much bigger
Doom
is a much bigger game for sure. Like,
yeah,
there's no arguing that.
But even like, say for example, enemy variety, like the enemies in Superhot do not change from start to finish. Like the only thing that really changes are like it's a short game, and within that short game, the only thing that really changes is like some of the weapons and some of the level layouts and how many enemies they throw at.
And you get the power to take over.
Yeah,
enemies,
you do get that later on.
You do get
that. I guess my point for Superhot, aside from the detractions I've said, and don't get me wrong, like I like the game, and I think the concept is amazingly cool. It's just, it's so little. Like, you know, I and when we're talking about top tens and making hard cuts and things like that, it's just like I didn't like it enough. You know, I liked what they were going for, but it wasn't like a top 10 for me just because there was so little there.
Yeah, I get that. I think for me it was just like I found that gameplay style of time freezing, looking around, figuring out a plan, executing on it, you know, trying to solve the puzzle that each level sort of presents to you. I think it really clicked for me, and I ended up doing a lot of the extra challenges and stuff, even though I don't think those are particularly great, just because I wanted to play more of that game. And I do also want to shout out that I think that game's sort of narrative aesthetic is really kind of neat, where you are in this sort of chat program, fake computer operating system, talking to people, and there's like other little things you can screw around with in the computer, but the main story beats are that you're talking to somebody about the game Superhot, and jumping in and out of it and getting patches to it, and there's like this sort of weird like cyberpunk mystery around like, what is this game? This game is kind of weird. It's maybe messing with my mind a little bit, and then that escalates in a way that I found really, really appealing. And I thought it had a nice arc for the 2 hours or however many 2 to 3 hours that it does last, and ends in a cool way. Like when you sort of get deeper into the bowels of what Superhot is and play more of it, and it starts sort of taking over your character's mind in the game, and you try to type things in, but it just replaces everything with super hot, super hot, super hot.
Spoiler.
It's pretty good stuff. Yeah, I think that game's really cool. I think it does cool stuff, some cool stuff narratively.
Yeah.
I think gameplay-wise, it's super fresh and different.
Yeah, I mean, they joke about it being one of the most innovative shooters in years, but like the idea it has is really awesome. Like it is one of the coolest new ideas we've had in not just shooters, but games in general in a while. Like, I mean, Superhot is the Matrix simulator we've wanted for 17 years.
Yeah.
Like, this is the game that finally did that and like lets you create your own Matrix style like gunfights.
Yeah, just the process of running through a level, punching somebody, taking their gun, shooting somebody else, ducking behind cover to dodge some bullets, picking up a katana, cutting someone in half, throw it across the room through 3 people, pick up another gun, continue on. Like that process is something you execute in almost a turn-based fashion, but it feels like you're an action hero while you're doing it, and then you get to see the end result at the end of the level as it chants super hot at you really loudly.
Yeah, replaying the level in real time at the end is a great touch.
And the chant over it is just the icing on the cake. Like, I think that's great. I really, really like Super Hot
really
a lot,
cool.
and I think
I just wish they could have done more.
Yeah,
with it.
and I
like
and
everything
Absolutely
that's
agree
there
with
is
that.
great.
I do
I
too.
mean, I would have loved to have seen, and if they had effectively like tripled the content, the main content in that game, and kept it varied and fresh, like and the campaign itself was reasonably varied and fresh, like
Yeah, it was.
and maybe added some story beats, some little gameplay tweaks or something like that. It could have, maybe we wouldn't be having this discussion about why it shouldn't be any higher.
Yeah, if that is the one knock against it, then that's fine. If it had had more content and maintained that quality for even longer, it might be my game of the year.
Yeah, and
I could see that.
Yeah, and I definitely think that that's fair, and like just like listening to all the arguments that you put forth, like I'm still just sort of like looking at it next to Titanfall, and I'm like, I've had single play sessions in Titanfall that are longer than what that game's length is, so I'm still having a hard time of like letting it rise much higher than 7.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that my vote is Super Hot at number 7, but I will say that the high moments of Super Hot for me are way higher than anything in not only Titanfall 2 but most video games.
Sure.
It's just it does not do it enough.
And again, as a mild detractor, I don't think it's quite that great.
Right.
It's pretty cool, and if they executed it with some length, then probably would sink in a little bit more. But
yeah, it seems like this is where it's probably going to land, and I can live with that. But it's a really awesome game. And
okay.
Even 7th best game of the year is not a bad place to be.
You got it on the list.
So, just to give everyone a rundown, we currently have our number 1 is Doom, then a whole bunch of games in the middle. Number 7 is Super Hot. Number 8, Toku Mirage Session Sharp FE. Number 9, Hyperlight Drifter. And number 10, Stardew Valley. The only game that we have left on our bottom tier right now is Titanfall 2. Do we just want to delete the bottom tier and then have Titanfall 2 in with the same discussion for ranking with the 3 games above it, or are we pretty much at a consensus that Titanfall 2 should be number 6?
I'm fine with grouping it up.
I think we should move it up and talk about it with these other ones.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right.
So I will tell you what I think about these 4 we have left. I am going to push The Witness as high as I can. The other 3 games in this tier, I could not give a crap about what order they go in.
Okay.
That's where I stand.
All right.
So could I convince anybody to put Fire Emblem Fates at number 6?
If it's not The Witness going down, I don't care.
Because that is the one game on this list of 9, not including Stardew Valley, that I played and didn't like that much.
Oh man, this is where we have no consensus, I guess, because The Witness is at the bottom of this list for me, and Fire Emblem is at the top.
Right. So yeah, we gotta hash this out, I guess.
Oh boy.
So does anyone have XCOM 2 really high? Because that might be our next one.
I was gonna say, like, let's talk about XCOM first, because I feel like XCOM's one of those games to where number 6 is a respectable spot to be in the top 10 list, and given that game's technical difficulties at launch, I think that should keep it down from the top.
I'll put out a little bit of a defense, but I guess it.
I mean, if I was personally picking, Titanfall 2 would be at the bottom, but I'm not. like I said, I want the witness as high as possible, but otherwise I don't really care that much. I'm just trying to suss out how much we care about XCOM.
Yeah, I mean the witness. That's a whole different discussion, but um, yeah, for XCOM 2, like XCOM 2, I think for me was the game, and I played XCOM, the first one, Enemy Unknown, but to me, XCOM 2 was kind of the one that grabbed me. So, however you guys felt about the first XCOM was probably how I felt about the second XCOM. Like, I actually went back and played through it a second time. Like, I thought it was made some smart updates to it. It did have some issues that seemed to have lessened somewhat on my second playthrough, but yeah, it's a game that grabbed me enough to go back and try to play it through on one save file, and that was a really exciting and engaging experience. And I thought it made some smart updates from the first game. Like maybe I'm not familiar enough with the first game because I just kind of grabbed it, played through it once, and put it down. That I would see.
There is definitely cool stuff in XCOM 2 that I like. I like the classes in XCOM 2 a good bit. So they changed up what all the major classes were from Enemy Unknown to 2, and I think the ones in the sequel are a little more flavorful and weird in a way I appreciate. The XCOM Enemy Unknown ones are super straightforward and easy to understand, which is also a positive, but I kind of like the XCOM 2 ones being a little bit more of a mix thing. And I did like some of the new enemy types, add a new level of like danger, and I even kind of liked having more of I forget what they were called. Is it Advent? Is that the enemy faction?
Yeah.
Just
Advent
sort of like
Lancers.
the sort of stock Advent soldiers, like kind of in a weird way, they're sort of bland enemies, but I kind of liked having them in the game as like people to just have like standard shootouts with, and then all the other enemies like the sectoids and stuff got to have like a more like well-defined role and use like really crazy special abilities. So I kind of like those changes in XCOM 2. I think that there are some problems with it, but I still definitely like a lot of stuff about that game.
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of stuff about XCOM 2 as well, but most of it is very much what I liked about XCOM 1. Like, all of the changes, either for me, were on par or even slightly worse than XCOM 1. Like, I could see how you'd like the classes better. For me, it was kind of on par. It was just a change for change's sake. Mm-hmm. And the human enemies versus alien enemies also, like, I don't think the human enemies are as interesting as the alien enemies. So
yeah,
while it does add a little variety, I also think they're just less fun.
Yeah, and I can totally see that argument.
Yeah. For me, the bigger issues are, I mean, other than I don't think any of its changes improved it for me personally, the bigger issues are the things we talked about yesterday, which is the technical issues are a mess, and more importantly than that, I think the pacing in the back half of the campaign is a mess.
100%.
Yeah, so it made playing through the game feel like I'm playing more XCOM, but with more hurdles to jump through, in a way that was not positive with the bugs and the pacing. So that's kind of where I came away from. I mean, at the same time, I think it deserves to be on this list and at least as high as it is because, like, that core XCOM formula still works, and ultimately XCOM 2 still nails that XCOM formula. Right. Like, Enemy Unknown is one of my favorite games ever, and like 90% of the time this game is doing what that game is. But at the same time, to not really go above and beyond and to have those few missteps, which are not necessarily minor missteps either, put a little bit of a damper on it.
Right.
The only other thing I do want to add about XCOM 2, I mean, I know that this panel, narrative is not as important to some of you, but I do think it was neat that they fleshed it out a little bit more and gave it, because they had a cool setting in the first game, but it was a very paper-thin, like, strategy game narrative. And in this game, they actually kind of, like, brought back some of the characters and gave them a few cutscenes to make it feel a little bit more like you were actually in a real setting and not just like, hey, here's a strategy game and you're doing this. Like, now travel the world and go save it. I mean, a lot of it was still that, but they actually put in some story beats to it, which I thought wasn't too much. I don't think it was overdone. I think it just added a nice little layer of fluff.
Yeah, I would add on to that I like the setup for XCOM 2 a lot, where it was like the aliens had taken over the world, and you're like a resistance guerrilla group going out to like do small missions to strike back at them, and from that they also had the idea of starting every mission in like stealth mode, and you could kind of survey the land and set up some stuff before engaging. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, for that one, I personally would have it probably a little above Titanfall 2. It's in number 6. I guess that's not terrible.
I mean, I like it better than Titanfall 2 as well. I actually thought you just liked Titanfall 2 better. I'm guessing Nate likes it better than Titanfall 2 as well. So if all of us, that's actually a revelation for me. I thought it was the other way. So if all of us like XCOM more than Titanfall, then that actually makes that a little easier.
Yeah, those are basically even for me, but if I had to pick, I would probably pick XCOM over Titanfall.
So,
Yeah,
do we want to put
well.
Titanfall at 6 and the next comment 5?
So let's talk about The Witness.
Well, yeah, we can talk about the other two as well.
Or, okay.
I mean, it may end up with XCOM and Titanfall being in those positions, but
I'll just move them relative to each other.
let's talk about The Witness.
The Witness is one of my favorites of the year, and I think more than almost every game on this list, other than maybe Superhot, it's also the one that does... I think it's the one that does the most special and unique things for video games that like kind of have not been done that way before. I think the way it creates... So, I mean, it creates this island with a bunch of puzzles on it, and you're primarily going around solving these puzzles. And the way it just drops you onto that island and never so much as utters a word about what you're supposed to do or how you're supposed to go about doing it is such a refreshing kind of like hands-off approach of, hey, you're on this island, you know, you go be you on this island. And the way it lets you, and then the way it fills that island with so many different varied puzzles, and kind of lets you tackle them at your own pace, is I found that to be just a really exciting thing to be able to partake in. And each different area of the island has very different styles of puzzles as well. So like it manages to stay fresh and varied all throughout. And the puzzles, like, despite all being line drawing puzzles, like the amount of variety in them is really crazy. And it even will start pulling in weird audiovisual components that you wouldn't expect, and kind of ends up turning things on its head in really surprising ways. And by doing that, it kind of makes you start thinking about things on like on a bigger scale than it would be if it was just, oh, let's do one puzzle after the other, because the island itself ends up becoming a huge part of these puzzles. Whether it's, you know, some of the puzzles you have to kind of look at what's behind the puzzle to solve it, or you have to listen to something that's like near the puzzle, or, you know, use some other visual cue that's like slightly out of the puzzle. Like, it really gets you to think in a lot of different ways. And like, you know, where most video games kind of train you to do one thing and you keep honing that one thing, The Witness is constantly showing you different ways to think. And I think that's really impressive, and especially that it does it without ever like directly teaching you any of that. Like, The Witness is also one of the best games at like just kind of leaving it up to you what you want to do. Like, it's not dragging you through a campaign to hit these moments. Like, The Witness really is a game about exploring what you want to explore and letting your curiosity drive the adventure. And I think it's a really profound way to approach a video game that a lot of games really haven't fiddled with too much. And it's like it hit me on a personal level that I wasn't expecting it to, and in a way that a lot of video games don't. And then it also has one of my absolute favorite moments of the year, which probably happens for a lot of people who play this game, and maybe happens at different points, which is also kind of the beauty of it, is that none of this is scripted. But you have the panels that you solve puzzles on, And then there are also these meta puzzles that occur out in the island, and the second you discover that those exist, which there are kind of hints for them around, but when you discover those exist, you realize that like anything could happen on that island, and nothing is to be taken for granted. And that to me is the magic of The Witness, is that it constantly is hinting at things and guiding things and nudging you towards things in a way that promotes like player exploration and self-exploration in a way that video games just don't do. And it makes it feel like anything can happen and everything's magical. And I think it's a really incredible approach to making a video game. And the way that it's able to do all that without explicitly telling you anything, like The Witness is one of the best teachers without actually teaching. Like it's incredible how they pull that off. I think that game is absolutely one of the best games of the year, and is also more unique than almost any game on this list.
I mean, I guess, would you like to say anything, Nate? I have some counter arguments.
I probably would just echo most of the things that you've already said. I think that game is super impressive in its layout and design, and that everything is so specifically placed that there's always something like right there for you to engage with and try to figure out or puzzle together. And that includes sort of the different areas that are just chock full of the normal standard panels, and then those environmental puzzles that he was talking about, where once you see them, you never unsee those things.
Yeah, once you see, you can't go back.
And it's just, yeah, I think that game is full of lots of little challenges and big challenges, and sort of interweaves within itself in a really cool, unique way. But yeah, most of the same arguments for me on that one.
So for me, I mean, The Witness is a game I played this year, and I finished it, and I found a few meta puzzles, but to me, it doesn't really qualify as a top 10 game of the year in 2016. Basically, it's an elaborate puzzle game with a kind of a nice aesthetic, and I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
But that's
and I mean, the thing is so this year I finished playing the Talos Principle, and I mean the Talos Principle kind of taught me even before playing The Witness that long first-person puzzle games, and the Talos Principle, it had meta puzzles, it had a lot of first-person puzzles. It was a long puzzle game, so kind of very similar vein. It kind of taught me that I don't love long puzzle games, which is basically what The Witness is. But the other thing that really I didn't care much for The Witness is that the puzzle games, which I have liked a lot, like Braid and Portal, they usually have something more than just puzzles. They have some kind of character or interesting thing. So as you're solving the puzzles, a lot of times you're unlocking something or finding something new. And with The Witness, it was just you're finding more puzzles. Even when you discover the meta puzzles, it's oh, okay, this island probably has a lot more puzzles. I don't really care. I'm just going to finish this game. And I mean, it was okay. It was fun. I enjoyed it as a long puzzle game, but I definitely felt the puzzle fatigue after about 10 to 20 hours of it, and just kind of powered it out. And I mean, there were some puzzles in there that were kind of frustrating. You would figure out the mechanic, the Sun Temple, I think, is the best example. You would figure out, oh, okay, the way light reflects will help me solve these puzzles, but then you have to kind of fiddle with where you're standing and guess where the author or where the developer wants you to stand to figure out the hint to solve this puzzle. And I found that to be quite tedious. So I mean, just like in other puzzle games, there's a lot of just hammering on puzzles. But the biggest kick to me were I guess the length and the lack of just interesting content. It's just extremely bland. It's a nice aesthetic, but I think there are a couple little video Easter eggs that you can find, and maybe some recordings, but nothing that gives you the sense that there's connected world or a backstory or any meaning to it. like with Raid in particular was a good example.
Yeah.
But to me, like The Witness, it was fun, but not even really a top 10 game.
Yeah,
For this year.
The Witness has a very strange aesthetic. I think, like visually, I think it's beautiful. I really, really like the look of the world. I think the like storytelling and I don't know if you would call it like the meta narrative is a little weird. I don't think I got it. I think some people probably did get it and enjoyed that, but I didn't get it.
As far as I could tell, it was just some like loosely coupled together philosophies, and maybe like it was trying to tell you to think differently or something like that.
Yeah, it's very philosophical, and some of that stuff I found interesting to listen to or engage with. And I assume there's more of that stuff that sort of makes more sense if you find all of it. I don't think it detracts from the game for me that stuff is there. I just kind of saw it and was like, oh, okay. I don't really understand what they're doing.
And that's kind of like my strong pushback is that you describe it as just a puzzle game where you just solve puzzles. But to me, the magic of The Witness is that there's so much variety into it, and there's so many things in that island, and different kinds of puzzles and ways to solve puzzles, and ways that puzzles interact with the environment around them, that to me, the magic of it is that it feels like anything can happen or exist on that island. And like the island is designed so meticulously to enforce that mystery, and that to me, even if not every single puzzle hits for you, there's so many puzzles there, and there's so much variety in those puzzles that there is a lot to discover in that game. And that's what kept me driving forward in that game, is that sense of discovery. You know, if I played a lot of puzzle games this year, and like I didn't put P-Cross 3D Round 2 or Steven Sausage Roll on this list because they very much are just series of puzzles, and like the puzzles individually in those games are probably as good as the puzzles in The Witness, but The Witness puts those puzzles in an island that's crafted so well to encourage exploration and that sense of mystery and discovery, that like this game hit for me on a personal level. That was like, playing it was almost this process of self-discovery of like, what are you looking for in this island, and like what stands out to you. And like I never felt this drive to complete every single puzzle, because that would be insane. For me, the thing was, I believe when I was playing, I think there are more interesting things to find in this island, so I'm going to look. And then once I felt like I was satisfied with the game, which I did do all of the laser boxes and also the final challenge, but like the game kind of props itself up as like you discover what you want to discover and get out of it what you want to get out of it, because it never really gives you direct objectives, and then you kind of, you know, you get your fill and you get it. But the way it sets up its world to promote that kind of exploration and discovery, I think is really profound. And I think it's a great, like, it's such a different approach to how so many games are built to drag the player through all of this prescribed content that they want the player to see. And I think The Witness is probably one of the best video games for saying, hey, here are things to discover and learn on your own. Go do that. Figure out what you want to figure out. And it creates this magical space to do that in a way that video games just have not done before.
I don't know. I mean, to me, that like it sounds like a game that personally, in a way that it didn't connect with Ryan, because you're more interested in the Zelda ones of the world, where you're plopped down in a big space and you go write your own narrative, where it sounds like Ryan likes a little more structure. And I know the way that I am is like, I want a video game with structure. Give me objectives, give me things to fill up, give me quests and all these sorts of things. So games like The Witcher 3 was probably close to the opposite of like The Witness in terms of going out and finding your own thing in the game world. So I think at this point it's one of those where I don't know that we're going to actually reach consensus with The Witness, because I looked into it and I chose not to play it because I was like, this is not a game that I'm going to enjoy. So that was a conscious choice for me not to even pick it up. So I don't know that we're going to come to any consensus as to where this should go, because we're at completely different places with what video games personally mean to us and how we play them.
And I mean,
sure.
I haven't pushed back harder against The Witness at this point, because I mean, I did enjoy it, and I think it's an incredibly well crafted puzzle game, but that's kind of all it is. Like, if you don't like puzzles, like, you will hate The Witness. Like, it has nothing else. Like, I know people who don't care that much for puzzles who liked Portal because the game has so much character, like, and so much humor. And like, The Witness is just like, it is an incredibly like deep rabbit hole of puzzles. And I mean, and then again, that's another, not really frustration, but another thing that I observed during playing the game, which I beat it, I enjoyed it. Like, I did a fair amount of content, there's an insane amount of puzzles, so I'm not going to even touch that stuff. But the thing that is kind of disappointing to me is a lot of the puzzle games that I've enjoyed the most, like when you solve puzzles, you're kind of rewarded with something interesting, like maybe a story element, you discover more about the lore, it builds a world, but The Witness is definitely like a stripped down pure experience. And when you discover something, finish a series of puzzles, whatever, like, you're rewarded with more puzzles. And that's pretty much the pure experience.
But you've learned so much.
I've learned how to draw.
You take that knowledge from those puzzles
Tetris
and go apply them to new puzzles and to more things in the world.
Way to match colors or apply filters or whatever other, puzzly mechanic they want to throw at me.
So I have bouncing off what both of you just said, I have two other pieces of defense. One is against the thing that if you don't like puzzle games, you won't like The Witness. If you don't like first-person shooters, you won't like Titanfall 2. If you don't like turn-based strategy, tactical games, you won't like XCOM 2. Like, all of these exist in their genres, and they do it. I mean, and they all do that stuff well. The other thing I would say is that the type of game The Witness is trying to be, that's more open-ended, is a type that is not only much less common, but is also executed well much less frequently, and I think that makes it a more simultaneously ambitious and unique game. Whereas if we look specifically at the games in this middle tier, Fire Emblem, XCOM, and Titanfall, these are all sequels that are extremely iterative at best on the games that came before them, and I think the strongest argument for The Witness in this tier is that it is really doing something unique. Which,
I mean, I would have some argument against that. Whereas with any of these other three games, maybe less so XCOM, but like for Fire Emblem, like, I imagine there's a block of people out there, I definitely know this is true of Awakening, who aren't really like strategy gamers or, turn-based strategy gamers or that type of gamer, but they might play that game, enjoy the story, and like, maybe they'll change the difficulty to help them with the combat. So there's more to that game than just purely like battles, even though that's what the big part of that game is.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to dig into Fire Emblem Fates, and I think Nate would agree with me on this one, is I think the only reason to play Fates is for the battles, and I think the story's pretty bad.
I think I'm probably going to say we should talk about Fire Emblem Fates. I know we're kind of spinning our wheels here, but I think, and you guys can push back on this if you want, but I think all three of us played XCOM 2, all three of us played Titanfall 2, and all three of us played The Witness, and we've all said we pretty much enjoyed those games.
All three of us played Fates as well.
And we all played Fates, but I did not enjoy it. So what I'm saying is, out of these games, we've all played all of them, and for XCOM, Titanfall, and The Witness, we've all said we pretty much enjoyed them, even if we have specific problems, but I actually dislike Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. So
I mean, I personally think that's just because you don't like
it. I have a feeling that...
And I think you tolerated Awakening because you got into its story more.
Yeah.
And
that was the point I was making about the difference.
And Fire Emblem Fates' story
right.
is bad.
Well, that's exactly the point I'm making. I don't love Fire Emblem games, but I really liked Awakening. But I think everything that I liked about, or most of the things that I liked about Awakening are really bad in Fire Emblem Fates.
Right.
So I don't see how you can not hold that against the game.
I do hold it against it, and in my top 10 write-up, and it is on my top 10 list, I acknowledge that like the story stuff I do not like at all, but I think the gameplay stuff is so strong, and that's where I throw my hats in with a lot of games.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I think that should be our number 6 because, and I can go through all the reasons I don't like it, but because it's the one game out of these 4 that we've all played that somebody dislikes.
I think it should go below The Witness. These other 3 games, I don't care their order. My as I said earlier, I think The Witness should go higher.
Oh man.
And I keep coming back to, as I'm looking at these 4 games, I just keep coming back to, like, you know, we talked about Civ being iterative, and we cut it from this top 10 for that, even though I think Civ 6 is the best launch Civ has ever had. And I don't think any of these 3 other games, XCOM, Titanfall, and Fire Emblem, are any better at being an iterative piece in those franchises than Civ 6 was.
I think you're right.
And we still have them high on this
I think
list.
you're right, but this it's just because this is a consensus list, so I think we're just going to have to let that one go.
Right. But this is my argument for The Witness, is I don't like The Witness is not an iterative thing. It is very much its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, for this middle tier, I put The Witness at the top, Fire Emblem at the bottom, and I don't care about the other 2.
Right, and I
put The Witness at the top and don't care about the other 3.
My list is pretty much the opposite.
Right. So, Fire Emblem. That game has really good tactical combat and RPG systems that series has always had. But I think nothing about the characters or the writing grabbed me in any way. I think that the general plot setup and the way the plot went for the part that I played was really silly and made, at best, very little sense and didn't add anything to the game for me. Every time I finished a battle, it would take you back to your little castle that you're supposed to be upgrading and talking to people in, and every time I saw that screen, I just had to turn the game off because I didn't want to engage with any of that crap. I think that the weird, like, we're going to shoehorn in a weird romance simulator in here so that we can have that.
Hey, Nate, you should touch your faces.
Is absolutely bizarre and out of place, and I don't know why it's there. And then they also shoehorn in time travel so that you can have random other characters that come across or that come out of the relationships that you make between your different characters, and I don't get any of that. It seems very strange and forced.
Well, and I mean, like
you won't get any.
Yeah, like everything that you're saying does, like, that sounds.
You won't get any arguments from me on literally anything that's not tactical battles or Effie doing push-up with giant trees, bench presses with giant trees. Anything that's not one of those 2 things in that game, I think is terrible.
So I mean,
But I'm also a big enough fan of the tactical battles.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I think that we have been stuck with these 4 games for long enough to where someone's just not gonna be happy.
Right.
I think that these games need to go down in this list. We've talked a lot about them for a while now. I don't think any of us are going to have any of you, because I didn't play these. I don't think any of you are going to have consensus or be happy with what the middle of this looks like. So, like, what is the least offensive list that you can see? Because it sounds like no one really cares about XCOM 2 or Titanfall 2 as far as where they fall, only into how they fall in relation to The Witness and Fire Emblem Fates.
Well, that's not true. I mean, so the list you're looking at right now, that's my 1, 2, and 3 in order in the middle tier. So, you know, I wouldn't say that I don't care about it or care about the order, but, you know,
so
like you said, somebody's not going to be happy.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the other.
Now, I mean, I understand Fowler's arguments regarding The Witness being an original game and just me not being a fan of those games. Because, I mean, that's That's fine. Everyone has certain genres that, even though the genre is perfectly okay, and the game is a great example of that genre, everyone has a genre they just don't like, you know? So I think that the arguments for The Witness are pretty strong. It sounds like it's one of the better or best games to come out of that genre in the last several years. So to me, that does provide a good argument to bring The Witness up.
Yeah,
I disagree with that.
Literally, the only
but
reason to not bring The Witness up is because you don't like puzzle games.
I
And like,
completely
if we're
disagree
saying
with
that an
that.
entire genre is not valid, then I think that's
I
pretty.
completely disagree with that. I'm not the biggest puzzle game guy, but I have definitely enjoyed several puzzle games, and I don't feel like The Witness is the best. Like,
Well, and so I mean,
So
this is just where it's going to get down to the two of you are going to disagree about The Witness until the end of time. And
so if
So,
Nate
can
and
I-
Flex both like The Witness, why don't we make that number 3, keep the rest in order, 4, 5, and 6, or
I was
5.
gonna say I would be fine with putting Fire Emblem at 6 and then put The Witness at 5, and then the other two can float up.
I actually think, the one thing I was going to, obviously I want The Witness as high as it can go. I don't feel like, we kind of sussed out that all of us like XCOM better than Titanfall. But I haven't gotten a sense that anyone, Ryan said it's his number 3, but like, I feel like my burning passion for The Witness and Ryan's passion for Fire Emblem are individually stronger than anyone's passion for Titanfall. So and we've all agreed XCOM 2 is higher. So that I feel like Titanfall kind of has to be number 6 at this point.
That's probably fair.
Okay.
all right, so
I
we're
don't,
going to make.
I don't know that I've heard a strong argument for Fire Emblem other than it's a good Fire Emblem game for the tactics part.
Oh,
But
I stepped away
But
while
everything
you
else is
were.
bad.
Stepped away.
You
Like,
stepped away while Nate railed against Fire Emblem.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right,
Yeah,
and-
I'm happy to make that point, like, not as a contentious point, but just that.
Yeah.
Obviously it's probably the best Fire Emblem game I've played in terms of like just being a challenging, like, fight strategy experience, and I think that is where it's really strong at. I actually played both Birthright and Conquest, so I played 2 of those games. Yeah, and just coming off of Awakening, like I really like that franchise and what it did. I still think the character writing was pretty funny for a lot of the characters. Like I enjoyed a lot of the characters. I do think the overall story arc was pretty weak, but I think the setting was really, really strong. Like I think the way they set it up and they were able to make it multiple games, I think that setting was incredibly strong. I think for me, it kind of carried the fact that the story was weak a little bit, but it also was a letdown that they just couldn't write anything better than what they did. But like the 2 families, I thought the 2 families were interesting. I thought the way they set it up is like you're kind of torn between these 2 nations and 2 families. I thought that was really interesting. And the story beats could have worked perhaps if they had done the storytelling a little bit, but they just kind of fell short there.
Yeah.
I'm going to say one last thing about The Witness, and then I will shut up on The Witness and be hands off on the rest of this list.
Okay.
I, like Nathan, I have a lot of grievances with Fire Emblem's story. I think the gameplay mechanics of Fire Emblem are the best they've ever been, but I think there are real problems with. I personally have real problems with the narrative aspects of that. We have talked
agree.
about XCOM 2's. Yeah, we have talked about XCOM 2's issues with bugs and pacing, and I think those are fairly substantial. Even though I think the core of XCOM is still as strong as ever. So I do really like both of those games, but I also think both of them have large problems. I think the only problems you can point to with The Witness are kind of ideological, like what video games should offer problems. I feel like what they tried to do, they nailed. Fire Emblem tried to do storytelling, and I don't think it works as well as they wanted. XCOM, I'm sure they didn't want it to be buggy, but it was, and I'm sure they didn't want it to have poor pacing, but it does in spots. I think The Witness, they nailed what they were going for, and if you don't like it, it's purely a case of not liking that style, that choice of how they wanted to build it. So that's my final push for The Witness, is that it nails what it's going for, and it's also not following the sequel thing, like I said before. I'm going to shut up about The Witness. I've said everything I could say about The Witness. How these final games get ordered, I'm gonna be hands off. My my position.
So, I think that the next game that should probably go down should be Fire Emblem Fates. From the argument made earlier that everyone played that and there was one active dislike for it. So I think that number 5 for that one is probably about as fair as we're probably going to get.
I won't contest that. I mean, it being below XCOM, those two are pretty close for me. And it sounds like there's a little bit more detraction for Fates.
Yeah, I think that's
Thrilled
a good
about
spot.
The Witness. I mean, I guess the only other thing I want to say about that is, we complain about Fates trying to have a story and missing. The Witness, like every other obscure puzzle game, kind of comes out and you don't know what it is, and then it just chose not to do that, that was a disappointment for me. And I mean, it wasn't that I was necessarily expecting it. It was just like, as I was playing it, I was like, well, there's kind of nothing here. Great. But where it ends up, if it ends up above or below XCOM, I guess it's not really that important in the grand scheme of things.
So, yeah, I was going to say, I also looked into XCOM 2 and didn't pick it up because it seemed like a lot more of XCOM 1. So for that, I personally would put it underneath The Witness. And then I'd put XCOM 2 at number 4 and The Witness at number 3. If I were doing this sort of just unilaterally.
Yeah, I think that would be me and Justin's vote as well.
Which leaves us with Doom at the top and then Dark Souls at number 2 by default. Now, I could see Dark Souls 3 maybe moving around somewhere, but I would have a hard time sussing out where it should go, just because we spent a lot of effort to get that middle tier ordered. So I think all you could really do is take Dark Souls and just like drop it down to number 7 or something. Which I don't really think I want to do that, because Dark Souls 3 is a really good game and it is like the best Dark Souls game that's come out, and they're probably not going to make another one of those. So I know it looks a little odd being where it is at number 2, but with what we ended up building into our consensus, it also kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, I have no problem with that game at number 2. I have no problem with this list as it is, other than super hot, but I'm willing to take that.
All right.
Could be better, could be worse. I'm not gonna cry over it.
So,
all 10 of these games are really good.
Yep.
I can agree with that.
So, for our final top 10 list for ATACS Game of the Year, number 1 we have Doom. Number 2 we have Dark Souls 3. Number 3 we have The Witness. Number 4 XCOM 2. Number 5 Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. Number 6 Titanfall 2. Number 7 Super Hot. Number 8 Tokyo Mirage Drift Session Sharp FE. Number 9 Hyperlight Drifter. Number 10 Stardew Valley. That is our top 10.
I wish it was called Tokyo Mirage Drift Session.
That would be awesome.
Bad.
Is that
Just
what
make
it
the
said?
name even longer.
Yeah, it's fine. You kind of melded that with Hyper
That's
Little.
fine.
there.
Hyperlight Mirage Drift.
That's fine. I mean, you know what? I've said I never want to say any of these game titles again. These are all bad games. They are horrible. You should never play any of them.
They're all great,
We've
Paul.
only been going for
Video
4
games
Why
are
hours.
is
great.
How are you
Stardew Valley
tired?
at number 10? Shouldn't it be?
Nope, we're done.
It's number 1 in my heart, and that's all that really matters. So.
Oh, man.
All right, well, that was a
tiring.
long time. I don't think I have anything else left. We have some other categories that we didn't get to that we're not going to get to
That's
unless
all right.
someone else wants to do that with me getting off the call. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good spot to end on. Though I would be curious to hear everyone's individual top games.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say my top 1 is Stardew Valley. My top 2 is Doom. So in that order. So let's just go with the top 2.
What about Legion?
Legion's an MMO that doesn't have any love on the greater internet, and I put a big spiel about that for multiplayer, so I wasn't gonna bring it back up.
Who wants to go next?
Flex, what are your top 2 games?
Are we doing 2 or
2
10?
or 3? Don't
We
do
all
all
made
10.
10s. Yeah, come on. It's just a
let's
a
do
list.
10. We made
talked
them.
about all of it.
I want to hear everyone's
Let's
top
read
10.
through 30
Paul's
games. Go ahead.
tired.
All right, so my top 10, number 10 is Super Hot. Number 9 is Titanfall 2. Number 8 is XCOM 2. 7 is Hyper Light Drifter. Number 6 is Forza Horizon 3. Number 5 is Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. Number 4 is Sid Meier's Civilization 6. 3 is Dark Souls 3. Number 2 is The Witness. And number 1 is Doom.
Go ahead, Ryan.
All right, Nate, you want to go next?
Oh, okay. Honorable mentions for Titanfall 2, Hyper Light Drifter, and Fury. Before I get started. Number 10 is XCOM 2, 9 Uncharted 4, 8 Hitman, 7 Civilization 6, 6 is Firewatch, 5 is Inside, 4 is The Witness, 3 is Dark Souls 3, 2 is Super Hot, and 1 is Doom.
All right, Mr. Snyder.
Number 10 is Off-World Trading Company. Number 9 is Hyper Light Drifter. Number 8 was Overwatch. Number 7 was Darkest Dungeon. Number 6 was Tyranny. Number 5 was Fury. Number 4 was Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE. Number 3 was Titanfall 2. Number 2 was XCOM 2. And number 1 was Fire Emblem Fates Conquest.
All right.
Them some lists.
That's the list.
Indeed.
Super Hot getting up to number 2.
Yeah, wow. I was a little surprised to hear that.
Like I said, if it had more, it would have probably been my game of the year.
If I'd have known that, I might not have dropped the hammer so hard on it.
It's all good.
Well, that's why we keep it a mystery, so you can drop hammers freely.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I'm spent, guys. I think we're going to call this one.
Alrighty.
Sounds real. That was a good run, guys.
Yeah, that was fun. We made a list. We talked about a lot of games.
Yep, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks, next week, week after, I don't know exactly, for our regular ATACS podcast. And then I guess we'll see everyone next year for 2017's Game of the Year.